first and try to give people answers. She had explained how the storm had wrecked the scene, how the suicide note had been too waterlogged to read, and why his family had moved out of town so suddenly. She had a lot of answers that might not hold up if people looked too closely. It might be time to move on again. The door behind her opened, and Paul Christensen exited the building. He didn't seem surprised to see her sitting outside.
Still trying to wrap your head around everything?
He said. She pried her eyes away from the shimmering water and met his gaze. Might not hold up if people look too closely.
I think I know what happened pretty well.
Time to move on again.
I'm just thinking about what to do next.
You're going after Hawthorne,
said the young officer with a tone of surety. Ravella, not one to be surprised, raised an eyebrow.
I followed you to the day before Detective Barrow died. I was behind the glass. I saw everything, heard everything.
Maria met the young man's gaze and marveled at how he looked back without even blinking. He might be good at his job yet.
Then why don't you seem to be afraid?
Hell, I was scared as hell for a few days, but I got over it. I figure I'm now one of the bad guys. The storms are gone, and we gotta get after Hawthorne sooner rather than later.
You weren't exactly paying attention, were you?
Said Maria, her eyes turning to the setting sun.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Good men can do horrible things, and there's always another storm. Forget,
she said with ice in her tone.
Forget everything you saw, and when I die again, soon, probably, forget all about me. Forget about the storm caller.
As the sun finally sank beneath the horizon, Paul searched for some way to respond. Finally, with a nod, he headed back into the station, leaving the detective alone in the parking lot. She thought about the papers and tapes she had stashed deep in a drawer in her desk. She had grabbed them from the toolbox in Barrow's shed after soaking the suicide note and staging the scene a bit. She still wasn't able to explain away the exact way he had died. It seemed that, a moment before he shot himself, something, possibly the storm breaking the window, had jarred his arm and caused him to shoot himself in the neck instead of the head. It had taken him quite some time to plead out. Hanging her head, the tears that Maria thought were gone forever finally came, fell, and vanished into the muddy waters of the puddle. Luck did not welcome me into this world, as I involuntarily entered it. My dad didn't even bother to stick around until my birth, and my mother suffered from a myriad of different psychiatric illnesses, keeping her locked up in various mental health institutions for most of the time. As such, the task of raising me fell to my grandparents. For all intents and purposes, they were my parents, and I never trade them out for anything in the world. So, despite my chaotic entry into life, my childhood was relatively normal. They guided me through all my firsts. They kept me fed and taught me valuable life lessons that I carry with me to this day. Their house was typically what you'd expect from any grandparent, an old house they'd owned for generations, full on with wallpaper that should have been changed in the late 70s. And despite how often they cleaned, there was always this smell in the air you wouldn't ever find in a new house. Still, that was all I'd ever known, and I loved each moment of it. But despite the joy they gave me, there was an oddity it took me many years to finally question. A room on the ground floor with a heavy metal door they always kept locked. "What's behind that door, Grandma?" I asked my grandmother after hearing strange sounds on the other side. I was only 4 and had just about learned to form coherent sentences, and even to my young mind, the place emitted a strange aura that didn't sit right with me.
"You'll understand when you get older,"
she'd say in response. I always let it go, but every now and then, I'd see my grandparents enter the room and lock it behind them. Sometimes they'd cry, other times they'd just talk. Whatever the case, the sounds were always muffled behind the thick walls and ancient metal door. It was only on the occasion that I awoke from muffled cries on the other side that I took to questioning my grandparents. Each time it would be the same answer. That day came shortly after I turned 15. My first girlfriend had just broken up with me over some trivial teenage stuff that at the time seemed like a massive deal. In hindsight, we were both just young and stupid, and our short-lived relationship barely made a dent in either of our developments as human beings. Still, I was heartbroken. Of course, my grandparents came to my aid with reassurances that I'd find true love, and that first relationships never last. Their words, as true as they might have been, didn't have much of an effect on my hormone-ravaged body. So, after a week of me sitting around and sobbing as I listened to depressing music, they decided it was time to share the secret of the locked room. My grandmother held my hand and led me towards the rusty metal door that had covered up a mystery since decades before I was born. I stood before it with trembling knees, waiting in anticipation to finally figure out what lay on the other side. She took a key out of her pocket and handed it to me.
Why don't you go inside?
She half asked, half ordered. What's in there?
That's more than I could possibly explain with simple words. It's something that has to be experienced firsthand. Trust me. 1 minute inside and you'll understand what I mean.
I hesitated, but curiosity was my main driving force. I reached out my hand and unlocked the door with a shaky hand. As I went to pull the handle, my grandmother left me with these parting words.
Stay inside until you understand, but do not linger. Unfortunate things happen to those driven by greed.
With that warning, she ushered me inside with a smile on her face. Her sinister warning paired with such an innocent voice and a friendly smile put me in a strange place between fear and comfort. Throughout my life, I'd always felt safe by her side, and despite the room being an unknown, eerie mystery, I didn't straight out feel afraid. She closed the door behind me, leaving me in the dark. I fumbled around on the nearby wall, feeling the moist wallpaper brush against my hand. Despite the discomfort, I quickly found a light switch that I flipped on. A dim light filled the room, originating from a singular, ancient bulb hanging from a chain attached to the ceiling. The walls around were all covered in the same pale wallpaper, filled with red stripes and repeating patterns. The floor was covered in red carpet that appeared clean in spite of its wet touch. It was an ugly place, that much was certain, but the thing that truly put me at a sense of discomfort was the emptiness. The room was rid of any furniture, just a square space with little more than its carpet and wallpaper. I just stood in the center and tried to figure out what I was supposed to do. The pain and sadness from the breakup still lingered in the back of my mind, but as I entered the room, it seemed less present, faded. As odd as it might sound, I could feel the depression that built up inside me over the past couple of weeks just drain from my soul. It was as if the room itself was eating up my sadness, and as the seconds ticked by, I felt more at ease. That's when I noticed the wallpaper started to seem even wetter. I stood up to check what was going on when droplets of water started trickling down the walls. From within them, I heard muffled moans akin to someone crying. Hundreds of voices mashed together in a symphony of tears, and as horrifying as it appeared at the time, it somehow took away my pain. It quickly dawned on me that the leaked water was tears. Salt-filled water that formed a small pool in the center of the room. I stood there, letting my own emotions fade as the room ate them up. Mere minutes passed, after which I felt fine. The world-breaking emotions I'd felt subsequent to my breakup became unimportant. Once I'd calmed down, I let my grandmother's warning ring through my mind once more.
Stay inside until you understand, but do not linger. Unfortunate things happen to those driven by greed.
I knew then that the time had come to exit the room. So I did, diligently following orders as I'd been taught. Outside, I found my grandmother waiting for me with a smile on her face.
Do you understand?
I nodded. Though I didn't fathom the mechanism behind the room, I definitely understood its purpose. The room was a place where emotions were taken, a place to regain a sense of inner peace after tragic incidents. How does it work? I asked.
I don't know. The room has been there since the time of my great-great-grandfather who built this place. I never got the chance to ask him myself, and no one else in my family ever truly understood.
I had so many more questions, yet I couldn't figure out where to start.
Devin, it's very important that you only use this room when you feel sad.
What do you mean?
Sadness is an emotion that doesn't take from the people you feel sad about, and it will not hurt you. But anger, jealousy, fear, those are emotions the room should never take from you.
What will happen if I go inside?
People will get hurt, and you have to live with that fact.
She didn't explain it in much deeper detail, and to be honest, she didn't have to. My grandfather didn't say much either, but then again, he wasn't the one who usually entered the room. He would warn me from time to time not to stay in there for too long, but I had a happy life and didn't use it more than a couple of times a year. Apart from the room, my life was relatively eventful. As my parents promised, I found true love a few years later. She was only my second girlfriend, and though I was skeptical about the adventure of love, I gave her a chance. A few years passed, and through thick and thin, I just knew she was the one. I proposed to Lisa when we were both 23, after a thorough interrogation from my grandparents. They loved her as much as myself, which just solidified the feelings I had for her. We planned to get married in the summer the following year, by which time we'd already moved in together. It wouldn't be a big wedding, as neither of us had much family to speak of. I had my grandparents, and she had her parents, plus an uncle and a couple of siblings. Other than that, it would be an event for our closest friends, a celebration on the beach, regardless of the weather. But as the date approached, I got a sinking feeling in my gut. I didn't even know whether or not it was related to my fiancé, but something was wrong. Then, I got a call from my grandfather. His voice sounded meek and broken. It was clear he was in shock. "She's gone, Devin." He struggled to get any more words out than that. My grandpa had always been a man of few words, but that was something else entirely. My grandmother had been an old woman, but her death was all but natural. She'd been hit by a drunk driver, a hit and run with the guy getting away. That day, a little piece of me died, as I lost one of the two people who'd always been there for me. The wedding was postponed until further notice. I moved back in with my grandpa so we could support each other through the ordeal. The next few weeks went by in a haze. My grandpa wandered aimlessly around the house, trying to keep things together in the wake of his true love's death. I kept waiting for him to enter the crying room, but he never did. He'd stand in front of the door and stare at it, but each time he'd turn around and keep himself preoccupied doing other things. "Why don't you go inside the room?" I asked. "Because I need to feel this. I need to keep a part of her by my side, even if it hurts." I learned an important lesson that day, that sadness doesn't have to be unhealthy, or even a bad emotion. Grief is a natural process of life, one appearing when things or people that mattered vanished from our lives. I started using the room less after that, only going in during depressive episodes and particularly bad days. 3 months later, they finally caught the guy who killed my grandma. A tip had led to his arrest with the trial pending. When they actually did start, the court proceedings were pretty short. He'd been caught on a local camera, and even though they'd gotten a license plate number and his face, he wasn't the actual owner of the vehicle, hence the delayed arrest. Never in my life had I felt such utter hatred and burning anger towards another person. His casual demeanor never changed throughout the session. He kept maintaining his lack of guilt. I could even see him chuckling to his lawyer as they mumbled about something. He felt no remorse, and when he was finally deemed guilty, he got angry instead of apologizing for the life he took. When I got home, not a single part of me felt that justice had been dealt. My grandfather didn't seem happy, but he wasn't as distraught as myself. Once nightfall came and he went to sleep, I decided I couldn't deal with all these emotions. It was time to visit the crying room once again, but not to remove sadness. No, I needed to get rid of my anger. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. The same poorly decorated, empty room greeted me. I stepped inside, ready to let my emotions vanish. For a moment, I just stood there in the middle of the room, waiting for anything to happen. But my anger remained. Even as the walls and floors started to feel moist, my hatred didn't budge an inch. That's when I noticed the odd coloration of the tears. At first, it was barely noticeable with the weird trails left behind the tears, but before long, the strong crimson color became an undeniable fact. The walls weren't crying, they were bleeding. The sight didn't scare me, nor did it make me want to flee. Instead, it filled me with a confusing mixture of burning rage and mind-blowing ecstasy. I felt justified in my anger. I felt gleeful that pain was spreading, though I didn't know exactly where it was going. The walls groaned in agony, a sound it had never produced before, as 100 voices cried in pain. Whether a minute passed or an hour, I couldn't know. But before I knew what was going on, my grandfather came barging into the room. "What have you done?" he asked in shock. I just turned and looked at his horrified expression as he realized the room was filled with blood. As he now snapped away from terror back to reality, he grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the room. Once the door was locked again, I finally came to my senses. The emotions, the blood, it had turned from twisted joy to overwhelming shame. We told you never to go into that room when you're angry. People get hurt. Why did you do it? My grandfather yelled, angrier than I'd ever seen him. I just wanted it to go away. You don't understand what you've done. There will be consequences neither of us can understand. But I realized then that he wasn't angry. He was just disappointed. He understood why I'd done my actions, but he had thought I was a better man than that. Your grandmother wouldn't have ever wanted this, he said as he left me alone in the dark. Neither of us used the room after that. I couldn't bear the shame, so from that day onward, I learned to suppress my feelings, pushing them to the furthest corners of my mind. In the following months, things slowly returned to normal. We honored my grandmother the way she wanted, by living happy lives. A week after the incident, a rumor started to spread through our community. The man who'd hit my grandma was found dead in his cell, though the cause of death wasn't officially announced. His blood had apparently started to boil, destroying him from the inside. He was found with an agonized expression on his face. I knew it was my doing by going angry into that room, but I didn't feel the least bit guilty. There was an odd, dark energy in the house. Following the driver's death. One I couldn't quite put my finger on, but it wasn't enough to overshadow the upcoming events in my life. Our wedding plans were back on, and in the summer of the next year, I finally got married to the love of my life. Around the same time, my grandfather started feeling sick. He'd lost a bunch of weight and struggled to eat. It wasn't long before he was diagnosed with inoperable pancreatic cancer. While the news hit me hard, he really didn't seem to mind. He'd had a long and amazing life, and despite the sudden onset, he was ready to go. I'm happy to have raised you like a son. Please don't stop living because I'm gone. Be happy. Get the family you always wanted, he'd say. Since we had time to prepare ourselves, his passing wasn't filled with shock. I cried, but I didn't break down like last time. I didn't even consider using the crying room to deal with my emotions. It became little more than a memory of former times. I inherited my grandparents' house, and since we didn't have better options, my wife and I moved in there together, ready to raise a family of our own. She went on to redecorate the place, a task heavily needed to bring it into modern times. While I liked my grandparents' style, it was a tad old-fashioned. She asked me about the room, a place I hadn't even thought to explain to her. I knew it would be an inevitability, but I knew she'd think I was crazy. Still, I tried my best to recount my experiences to her, as insane as they sounded. At first, she thought I was joking, but she quickly noticed my serious expression.
Can I have a look inside?
I couldn't let her. I couldn't let anyone inside the room, so I'd put up additional locks. Against all odds, she believed me, though she didn't understand what would happen if she went inside. She trusted me enough to keep her promise. We lived together in happiness, and before even a year had passed, Lisa fell pregnant. We were both over the moon with joy. For months, we baby-proofed our home and fixed up the guest room to turn it into a nursery. Then, at the 5th month of pregnancy, Lisa started experiencing severe cramps. We immediately took her to the emergency room to discover she was giving birth prematurely. Despite the doctor's best efforts, the baby didn't survive. The two of us fell into depression, and for the first time in over a year, I thought about using the room. But my grandfather's words kept ringing in the back of my mind that I needed to feel the pain, that it mattered too much to just erase. So, I kept trying to remain strong, supporting my wife in every way that I could. But it was a downhill battle, one we were both losing. One night, I awoke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat from a reoccurring nightmare. I felt guilty for our dead, unborn child, as if my actions had somehow caused his death. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence, but on that night, I didn't find my wife sleeping beside me. In the distance, I could hear muffled cries, hundreds of them hidden behind a locked door. I knew exactly what had happened. My wife had gone into the crying room. I ventured downstairs, disappointed and confused as to how she'd gotten inside. She'd found the keys I'd hidden, and for the couple of missing padlocks, she'd simply torn them off with a crowbar. I rushed inside to find the room filled with tears, the entire floor covered in a deep pool of water, tall enough to leak into our living room, but the walls had long since stopped crying by the time I got down. The muffled sounds I heard weren't sobs at all, but laughter. Lisa sat in the middle of the pool with an empty expression on her face. "Lisa, what are you doing?" I asked. She didn't respond. She didn't even look at me. She was absolutely catatonic, to the point where I had to carry her out of the room and lock it behind. She was alive. That much I knew, but she'd been hollowed out. She'd stayed inside the room so long that every single emotion she'd ever felt and could ever feel had been erased from her personality. The woman I loved was just gone. I called an ambulance. What else could I have done? But as I already knew, there was nothing left to do. She was checked into a psychiatric facility with little hope of recovery, leaving me all alone in the world. I try to visit her weekly, but it doesn't look like she even recognizes me. I'm so empty. I keep thinking about going back into the crying room. It's just too tempting not to feel anything anymore. To those who sleep. This happened a few years ago. You may have heard rumors if you're on campus. Some even circulated online. Nobody knew what really happened because I'm the only one who knows. And I kept quiet for a multitude of reasons. None of them matter now. Here's what really happened. The four of us were handpicked for this experiment by Professor Richardson because we'd all studied under him, worked under him, and, as much as anyone can, earned his confidence. He said this one was different. We had to keep quiet. He wanted to keep details to a minimum. All he would tell us before going in was that he required a month of our lives, and that if he succeeded, sleep would never again be a necessity.
Think about it, he said. 6 to 8 additional hours every day. Your month will be paid back before the year is out.
If he was right, we'd have a Nobel Prize for sure. It would change the world. We believed in him. Sleep would become a hobby. Imagine that. We felt lucky to be a part of it. We went in with the highest of hopes. We were so excited for a new future for humanity and for ourselves. I was the only one to leave that place. Week 1. Professor Richardson brought us out to the location in his van, explaining along the way what we were to do. For the purpose of the study, we were asked to remain in the compound, as he called it. We would be locked in fact, and deprived of windows and Wi-Fi. Other than endure patiently, we didn't have to do much of anything.
My machine does all the work, he explained. It uses a complex melange of sound waves to disrupt the processes of sleep, evolutionary appendices from the days before civilization. The most immediate side effect you'll notice is that you won't dream.
Any other effects we noticed, we were to catalog. We were, as he said,
in uncharted territory,
and so we had to
map out the dangers.
The immensity of the project was inspiring enough. Then we saw the compound, the octagon as it was known, a concrete octagonal structure built at the end of a labyrinth of dirt roads somewhere in the backwoods of Searcy, Arkansas. I've never been able to find it again. The professor said it was originally intended as a jail for terrorists, but it was abandoned and never used. It's virtually impenetrable, invisible to satellites, but for us, it had been stocked with all the comforts we'd require for a month of dedication. I don't know if any of us expected to really conquer sleep. We thought perhaps a reduction in sleep requirements could be possible. We spent a fair amount of the first 2 days speculating on how the machine works with its complex melange of sound waves, and whether sleep really is an evolutionary appendix, as the professor had claimed. By the 3rd day of only getting 3 to 4 hours of sleep, contrary to feeling groggy, we were more awake and full of energy than ever. We were alert and ready to debate these ideas. That's when the excitement really hit us.
He really did it,
JT said. JT was a big, ginger-bearded guy, the sort of guy who still has a healthy collection of magic cards.
Oh, we don't know that,
James said, always the skeptic.
The machine could be stimulating the adrenal glands to mildly dose us with adrenaline all throughout the day. Even if that were so, wouldn't change the fact that he beat sleep.
With our extra time, we were getting in tons of reading, played a stupid amount of Call of Duty, and still had plenty of time to sit around and debate.
I guess I have to admit, it's amazing,
James said. We all felt it. It was almost euphoric, the excitement we felt for being possibly the first humans to live without the need for sleep. Technically, we still needed a few hours each night, but we decided together that it was more out of habitat than necessity. Then, on the 4th day, Don said,
"There's something wrong."
Don was a serious one, superstitious. He used to be a Franciscan, I'd heard. It showed. He didn't talk that much, and when he did, it was usually worth listening to. This time, he put into words something I'd been feeling, but I guess kinda just buried under the excitement.
With the experiment, or?
JT asked.
I don't know,
he said.
It's a feeling. This constant uneasiness, like this isn't going the way it's supposed to be going, or that we're in the wrong place.
No, James said.
I think that's it. It's this place. We all knew it was weird when we first saw it, this concrete octagon, but living in it, I think there's something wrong with this place. Like something terrible happened here.
I understood it was never used, I said.
Governments always say that about torture prisons. It's more than that,
JT said.
I feel it too. I thought it was just from lacking windows at first, but that's not it. I think it's the angles.
The angles in this building don't add up to what they should. What if everyone's dead outside? Dawn asked. James jumped up so fast, his chair clattered to the ground. Cut that shit out, Dawn. Why would you even say that? Well, what are you saying? I asked. This is a haunted octagon? Yeah, James, JT said. Was it built on an octagonal Indian burial ground? Okay, you want to play that? He said. I can play. Look, the space around us transforms based on how we perceive it. Take a church. The people who go there perceive it as holy, so they do things, like leave their crutches behind when they force themselves to walk, or light their candles, or whatever. These changes to the space only enhance the perception of holiness and influence future visitors to perceive it in the same way and change it in the same way. Haunted places are the same. For one reason or another, they begin to be perceived as haunted. The more they're perceived that way, the more they're imbued with the hauntedness. Even if you've never seen the place before, you pick up on the subtle clues if you're at all sensitive. In a way, it's true to say it's a haunted space. It's true to say the church is holy. Our interaction with the space has made it something more than just wood and sheetrock or whatever. So what I'm saying is, maybe some things happened here and we're picking up on it. Some really awful things. And in that sense, yes, it's a haunted octagon. No, Dawn said. Places are considered holy because an authority telegraphs it to whoever will listen, just like haunted places make a lot of money off dumb tourists. Whatever it is, I said, we all agree something isn't feeling right about our situation. Maybe it's the machine. I say we write it down as a side effect. On that point, at least, we were all able to agree. It didn't put any of our uneasiness at rest, but we wrote it down. We somehow agreed upon the phrasing right away, too. Acute sensations that we've entered into something where we aren't welcome. Week 2. We tried our best to ignore these feelings and carry on like we had been. Those first few days had been some of the best in our adult lives, but we never got back to those happy times. I realized around then how short-sighted of Richardson it had been to leave us there without any means of contacting the outside world. When I voiced that opinion, "That's what I've been thinking," JT said. "Richardson isn't a dumb guy, you get me? I think he did this on purpose." "Why would he do that?" I asked. "For science, of course," he answered. "It's one of those meta-studies where we're told it's about one thing, but it's actually about how we react to the experiment, like the Milgram experiments." "Or it's not his choice," James said. "The government is making him do it, and that machine is designed to control us, or some sort of cult. Scientologists." "This is a government-built installation," JT said. "That actually makes sense. Not the Scientology part, though." "Think about it," James started, but I interrupted. Okay, I said. "Let's come back down to earth for a second. Best case scenario, Richardson is just a jerk who doesn't care about our personal well-being, right?" "Give it a rest," Dawn said, the one I least expected to snap at me. "Stop trying to act like the most rational guy in the room. You don't know what Richardson's into. He's into other things he'll never talk about publicly." I looked at the others and saw similar confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I've heard a little bit about this, actually," James said. "He has some fringe ideas. Let's just say he's not the respectable academic he presents himself to be," Dawn said. "I've read some of the content he doesn't publish. He thinks and very seriously believes that there's something else, something besides this." He knocked on the table, "Something more than material stuff." "That's not completely strange," I said with a shrug. I was expecting worse. "He put it this way," Dawn continued, ignoring me. "Think back to the beginning of existence. There had to be conditions such that the universe's existence was possible. If the universe wasn't possible, then it couldn't have come to exist. Does that stand to reason?" We nodded. "Okay, and those conditions cannot be material nor laws of matter, since those came into being with the existence of the universe. So whatever those conditions are, they have to be something other than the basic substance of the universe. Does that make sense?" "I guess," I said. "This isn't turning into an argument for God, is it?" He shook his head. "It's an argument for something that continues to exist. Except we can't even say that, because ideas like something and exist are developed by, for, and within physical reality. This is something pre-physical, something pre-existence. Whatever it is allowed the universe to spontaneously be. Who knows what else it's been doing these billions of years? Just asking that question is already violating the stipulations, I started saying, my background in philosophy kicking in. Yes, Don said. But he believes. He thinks it's the source of free will. Our brains touch it somehow, and so he believes he can reach it, study it, use it. I didn't get to read much more than that. And if this experiment is something he's not putting on the books, James added, it may have to do with his more peculiar interests. So instead of eliminating sleep, he's trying to make us see God? I asked sarcastically. I don't know, brother, Don said. I'm just saying, if he thinks the brain touches another reality, this is just the kind of experiment he'd want to try to prove his theory. Do you think he has the room bugged? JT asked. I think he might be in here somewhere, I said without even thinking of what I was saying. They looked to me, waiting for an explanation, and with what looked like fear in their eyes. Strange we should be afraid of this man we admired less than 2 weeks ago. I sometimes feel someone watching me sleep, I explained, my voice starting to tremble. I figured it was one of you at first. I feel it specifically when I'm not quite awake, but not quite asleep. Those moments when you wake for a few seconds to adjust your pillow. I could feel and see and hear someone standing over me, just breathing and watching. And I was too close to unconsciousness to do anything about it. Then I just fell back to sleep. I could see the terror filling the other's eyes while I spoke. I've been feeling it too, Don said, almost in a whisper, like he was scared to be heard. I thought I was losing it. Me too, James said. Someone else is in here, I said. We drew closer together, our eyes darting nervously around the gray concrete room. We were all feeling the same thing, I'm sure, that we were trapped inside this horrible building with someone or something else. Wait, JT said. What would this person be eating? We don't see our food disappearing, then there's no way out. There isn't really anywhere to hide. We gotta start being sensible. I let out a sigh of relief because he was right. Okay, let's think about this, I said. Let's say this is another effect of the machine. Phase 2, paranoia. Phase 2, paranoia, Don said with a consenting nod. We wrote it down. The next day, when we all gathered together for breakfast, JT asked, have all of you had any dreams? We all shook our heads. Richardson was right on the money with that one, I said. Do you know feral children don't dream? How do we know that? James asked. They tell us. The few that get socialized. They say dreaming is something that starts only after, when they have language, object permanence, and all that stuff. Well, what about dogs? I asked. Like chasing rabbits in their sleep. Automatic responses. Maybe language and object permanence only impacts the ability to remember dreams, James said. Both are consistent with superficial data. The onus is on you to prove otherwise. JT scoffed. What's your point anyway? Don asked. The point is being dreamless. I don't think it's healthy. I think the machine isn't making us not need sleep. It's making us not feel tired. I think all of this might be happening because we aren't dreaming. We can't really answer, can we? James said. Dreams naturally accompany REM sleep, so we don't have any studies that differentiate between the effects of not dreaming and of not sleeping. Or maybe we are dreaming, and the dreams are just going somewhere else, JT said. I didn't know what he meant by that. Nobody did. But we all stopped talking then and dispersed. Something about it felt too true. Week 3. Our gatherings for theoretical discussions became rarer and rarer. We tended to isolate ourselves and eyed each other with suspicion. I still had those feelings of uneasiness and of unwelcomeness every day. And each night, the figure standing over me. I was sleeping even less now, about an hour tops. So little sleep that I'd started to catch it running away. The last time, I was awake enough to see where it was going. It's this one particular corner of my room that's always struck me as peculiar. I caught myself staring at it even when I didn't want to. It's a point where the angles are strange. My eyes had trouble focusing on it. The figure skulked straight to that point and disappeared into it. When I woke up fully, I questioned whether I had hallucinated the whole thing. Perhaps phase 3, hallucinations. I went over to that corner and looked at it closely. It smelled strange, like turpentine. Then, the more I stared at it, the more I forced my eyes to focus. I was sure something was moving inside, and it was watching me. I heard this awful, hate-filled sound come from deep in the corner then. I didn't wait around to understand what made that noise. I left that room for good. I took all of my short naps in the library from then on. While lying in the library, I overheard JT talking to someone in the corridor. He was telling him about the angles again. He said there are more degrees in the building than can possibly be in a standard enclosed shape. 2.7488 degrees more.
Just enough to drive you nuts, but not enough to be obvious,
he said. Whoever he was talking to said something I didn't understand. Something like,
"Those are the degrees of ripping."
The voice was distorted somehow, so I can't be sure. What I was sure of was I didn't recognize that voice at all. Whoever JT was talking to wasn't one of us. Maybe silly, but I was scared. I stayed there, pretending to be asleep while JT walked by. And as he did, I felt someone or something come into the room and stand over me. Then, it went away. After a minute or so of telling myself I was being foolish, I went following after JT. I didn't see him anywhere. I bumped into James, and he said he also hadn't seen JT.
Have you seen or heard anyone who shouldn't be in here?
I asked him. James looked at me with a mixture of surprise and terror.
How do you know?
He asked.
I haven't told anyone. About what?
He told me he'd heard his mother calling to him. Not a faint sound that he was confused for his mother, but her voice, clear as mine, calling out to him. He almost answered her, he said. Almost. Then he stopped himself.
She's been dead for years, man,
he said.
Whatever was calling me, it wasn't my mother.
I saw he was shaking, and his hands were clenched. I told him to hang in there. It might be aural hallucinations. I'd been hearing things too. A crying child, so low at first I thought it was plumbing.
We should have a meeting,
he said. I thought about JT and what I'd heard moments ago.
Let's just tell Dawn,
I said.
As a side effect of the machine, it makes sense,
Dawn said after we told him.
The sounds are not supposed to be audible, yet somehow our brains must be picking up their random patterns and interpreting them as something. The brain assigns a memory to make the pattern meaningful. Do you believe that?
I asked.
Not for a second,
James said. But we had a shortage of rational explanations, and that was a pretty good one. I'd hoped he was right. A few days later, I found James in the gym, pounding away at a punching bag. I asked him if he was doing okay. He ignored me. So I went back to the reading room. A few minutes later, he was behind me.
That voice I've been hearing is not my mother,
he said.
Of course not,
I said. We'd already decided that after all.
No, I mean, I don't know what I mean. It's just, my mother was a kind person. Even if this voice was trying to sound like her, it's not like her at all. It's not kind. It's not human.
I put down my book and looked him full on to see if he was serious. He was. Very much so.
She's been telling me about all sorts of things,
he said.
She asked me if you remember the shed.
I couldn't say anything to that. I was speechless. I never talked about that, for good reason. It took me years to come to terms with what happened. It was a long time ago. I was out playing behind our house in the woods, as I often did. I like to construct shitty tree houses. I went a little off property and came to this shed. I'd never seen it before. It looked old, though. I remember that. I heard a kid crying inside. Thinking I might have a friend to make tree houses with, I looked through the window. The kid was all chained up, and there was a dog bowl on the floor. I wanted to help, but I knew I was trespassing. I looked around. That's when I saw this man off about 20 feet into the woods. He was dressed in all black, old-fashioned clothes, like 19th century clothes. He had to have been watching me the whole time, expressionless. I went running all the way home. I was so scared, I didn't tell my parents about it until I was supposed to go to bed, and I had to explain why I was terrified to go to sleep. They had the cops out right away. They found the shed. I heard they found the chains and bowl, but the kid was gone. I've always blamed myself for not helping the kid right away.
Do you?
James asked.
Yes. Okay, well, she's been telling me how to get out.
I looked at him without a word because he sounded so manic.
She said there's a secret exit inside JT. We just have to cut him open to get out.
James, I said, unsure what else to say at that point.
Oh, I know,
She said with a gulp.
I know it's not true. I just had to tell someone. I don't know what's going on in this place.
He added.
I'm scared, man.
So was I. We had to get out of that octagon. Week 4. James and I started looking for ways out after that. Since we weren't sleeping at all now, we had plenty of time to do it. Every time we thought we found something, it was a dead end. It was while we were doing this that we saw Don standing alone in the corridor with his back to us.
What's going on?
James asked. Something about it just seemed strange.
Don? You okay?
I called. He turned around and with a smile gave us a big wave.
Bye, guys,
he said and walked around the corner. I looked at James to see if he was thinking the same thing as me, that something bad was about to happen, and he was already looking back at me. We took running after him. He was at the end of the next corridor already, getting in the elevator.
Don, no!
We shouted and ran after him, but the doors closed before we got there. He went up. The thing is, the octagon is a one-floor building. There's no elevator, never before or after. I don't know where Don went or if what I think I saw really happened, but I know I never saw Don again.
I don't understand,
James said.
What's happening?
Before we could take time to think about it, a group of people rounded the corner and were walking toward us.
I think we should go,
I said.
Who are they?
He asked.
James, let's go,
I said.
Why are they blurry?
I don't know, but we're going. I grabbed his arm and pulled him with me. Then I ran. I ran until I got back to the kitchen and hid myself between the wall and the fridge. I was sure James was right behind me. I could hear his footfall the whole way, but when I looked, he was gone. I stayed there until my body couldn't really take it anymore, probably a few hours. When I slipped out, I saw someone peering at me from around the doorway. I was so startled, I backed up against the wall. It was a little boy.
Hello?
I said. Then I heard screams. The boy was gone. More screams. I couldn't just leave someone in distress. Not again. I ran toward the screams, scared of what might be happening to James. I heard a scream again, but this one choked out. It was coming from JT's room. I wished then, and still wished I hadn't opened that door. James was in there. He'd sliced JT open, and he was feeling around in his guts. The shocked, agonized expression was frozen on JT's face.
What did you do?
I said.
I have to get out,
James said as he dug through JT's intestines. I backed out of the room. I didn't know what else to do. I just had to find somewhere to hide until Richardson could get us out of there. Once I was out of the room, I heard James saying,
Mom?
And then,
Oh no.
And then he screamed. I ran back in. James was gone. The doorway to the room hadn't left my sight. There's no way he got out, but he was gone. And noxious black smoke was coming from JT's abdomen. It smelled like burning tires. I went back to the kitchen. I found a supply of candles, melted some wax onto paper towels, and stuffed my ears with it. Then I curled up in a corner with my eyes closed and waited for sleep to come. I waited a long time, but eventually it came. When I woke up, Professor Richardson was shaking me. He'd already pulled the paper towels out of my ears. I thought he'd come early. I found out later I'd been asleep for several days. He asked me where the others went. I told him everything, as much as I understood. I tried to take him to JT's body, but it was gone. Not a trace of blood. He took me to a hospital after that to make sure I was okay.
I'll foot the bill,
He said.
Also, you can forget about your student loans.
Is that how it is? I asked.
I put you in danger, so yes, you've earned it, if you keep quiet.
I told him I couldn't keep quiet because of what happened to the others.
You don't think those things really happen, do you? Would all the laws of the physical universe suspend themselves just for you four? No, those were waking dreams. You weren't supposed to dream at all. I thought I'd compensated for it. The machine needs tweaking. That's science. The others are fine. They'll all be laying low for a while until I publish the results. Please do the same.
I wanted to believe him. I've always considered myself a rational person. I just didn't believe him. Yes, it all could have been a dream. That was the simplest explanation, but it was no dream. I tried to find the others. I never could. I don't think they're fine at all. I tried to tell the police about it, but they wanted evidence. I couldn't even show them the octagon. James, JT, Dawn, if you're out there and hear this, please let me know you're okay. And everyone else, let me tell you what I think. I think Professor Richardson was right about one thing. Sleep really is something we evolved to protect us, except not from the creatures that roam the forest at night. It protects us from something much worse, something all around us. It's not obsolete at all. Thank whatever you believe in that you have sleep, and you dream. A fun little fact for any of you that are still here. The dark somnium means the dark dream. Somnium is Latin for dream. I figured it would be a nice little thing to throw in here since, this whole story was about dreaming. But I hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know what you think. And with that said, have a good night. I've never really considered myself to be much of an explorer or a particularly brave man. However, that hasn't seemed to stop me from getting into the predicament I'm in now. It was around 3 months ago that my girlfriend of 4 years left me for another man, and she really was the last tether keeping me grounded to any semblance of a social life. Don't get me wrong, I have friends that I love to see, but most live across the Metroplex, about an hour's drive, so it's a rare day when I make the effort to drive out there, and even more rare to have them drive out to see me. Over the past 3 months, I've gone through most of the stages of a breakup: sorrow, self-pity, hopelessness, and anger. But after taking a look at myself, I decided there were a few things I could improve. And although I'm not in a particularly bad shape, I wanted to sculpt my physique to something more attractive to women. This is a problem as I'm a fairly lazy man. Not everything in my life has been handed to me, but I've learned to put the least amount of effort into any and all activities as possible. So, rather than buying a gym membership and taking the 5-minute drive down the road, I decided I'd simply build myself a home workout center and do some ab blasting in my apartment. I only recently moved into this place about a month before my ex left me, sharing a 2-bedroom with absolutely no one. It lies in the far corner of the complex on the 2nd story, and the balcony gives me an excellent view of the enormous soccer fields and the woods beyond that. The only problem is that the landlady lives underneath me, and I learned fairly quickly that the whole home gym setup was a bust, as almost immediately when doing reps with the weights I bought, I heard the crotchety woman banging on the floor with a broom handle, commanding me to keep it down. As irritating as it was, walking on eggshells all the time, I suppose it was understandable. So I opted to cut corners some other way. And rather than doing the smart thing and hitting the gym, my eyes turned to the vast fields at my very doorstep. The fields were simply massive, stretching back several hundred yards, surrounded by dense woodland on all sides, other than the front, which faced my apartment, and the equally large parking lot. which was sunken in such a way as to be unseen from the main road that led to it. It was October when I first checked out the fields. I live in Texas, so it doesn't get cold here until December, if at all. So I had plenty of time to get familiar with the area before winter hit. I only went at night, preferably past midnight or even 1 a.m., when the large floodlights were shut down and all the late-night teenagers were done with their shenanigans. I would slip through the decrepit fence that shoddily guarded my apartment and disappear into the night. And during this time, I felt amazing, completely uninhibited and alone, just the way I liked it. I would bring out my weights, do laps around the field, and heck, I even brought a few buddies out there once or twice to have some drinks and play soccer once it had cleared out. And although I will admit going out there in the pitch black alone with nothing but the moonlight could be slightly unnerving at times, it was far better than the alternative, at least at first. As my isolation grew, my sleep schedule strayed from the norm, and it wasn't long before I found myself awake at odd hours of the night. Even now, I'm recording this at 2 a.m., and about a week ago was a particularly rough one. After fruitlessly lying in bed for almost an hour and not even feeling my eyelids flutter once, I realized my efforts to fall asleep were futile, and I found myself crawling out of bed at 1 in the morning. It's strange. Many of the times I find myself drawn to the field, it's almost as if I'm not in control of my body, or even my own thoughts. And as I threw on a jacket in preparation for the chilly embrace outside, I glanced outside my bedroom window, finding, to my bemusement, that the floodlights in the field were still on. Because it was so late, I figured one of the workers must have forgot to turn off the lights for the night, and initially thought little of it. I grabbed my phone and headed outside. I was feeling strangely courageous that night, confidently strutting out onto the barren field, dropping off my shirt and jackets near the edge, feeling like the biggest man in the world. And after putting on some music on my phone, I headed to the center of the wasteland, halfway expecting to see someone out there waiting for me. The overpowering luminescence of the floodlights, combined with the sharp contrast of the utter and complete darkness of the forest encompassing it, made for an odd sensation indeed. But I still found myself walking to the center of the field and simply observing my surroundings. In the darkness, in the early hours of the morning, it is easy for one's mind to play tricks on them, and it was not uncommon for me in the past to do a double take over my shoulder whenever I thought I saw a shadow sprinting through the night, only to see a harmless flag or feel a wave of fear crawl up my spine when I heard the rustling behind me, only to discover a plastic bag in the breeze. But this night felt different. The glaring light cast long dark shadows across the field, and as I marched around, cold and alone, with only David Bowie blaring from my phone to keep me company, I felt remarkably uncomfortable. After kicking a soccer ball around the field for less than 5 minutes, a strong gust of wind hit my shirtless body, leaving me shuddering involuntarily. But this was met by a loud clanging sound of metal on metal from the woods at the edge of the field, which halted my shuddering almost immediately as I stood still as a statue, with goosebumps quickly forming up my arms. As I mentioned, it was not uncommon for there to be noises around the field, even at night, and I quickly rationalized that the wind had knocked something against a large metal garbage can at the edge of the field, and I continued with my workout, still in the zone, but alert. David Bowie abruptly shut off, jarring me into glancing at my phone. Damn it, I thought out loud. The battery had died. That's when I heard the clanging noise again, and my head snapped back towards where I perceived the noise to have originated from. I waited several seconds. No wind this time. For those who don't know, in a large field like this, it's nearly impossible to pinpoint just where a noise is coming from because of the effect echoes can have in such a wide, unobstructed space. But I had the distinct feeling it was not coming from the garbage can at the other end of the field. I had enough fun for the night. Without glancing back, I put my phone in my pocket and started jogging away from the center of the field and back towards the hole in the fence that led directly to my apartment. And that's when it happened. The floodlights went out. I kid you not, every single one of the lights turned off instantly. Here I was, damn near naked, eyes watering from the cold and goosebumps covering every inch of my body when darkness took the field. That's when my jog turned into a sprint. I felt exposed, alone, and oh so vulnerable. I'm not a feeble or cowardly man, but I knew anyone or anything out there messing with me so late at night had to have been crazier than I was. I still had about 100 yards to run when I glanced behind me. I don't know whether to be grateful or terrified that I saw nothing in the shadows of the night, but either way I ran harder and faster than I had in a long time. My terror was so severe, I completely forgot to grab my shirt or jacket, both of which were Christmas presents, but immediate relief overtook me once I entered the premise of the complex, squeezing through the broken fence, racing up the stairs and slamming and locking the door behind me. Breathing heavily, I stumbled over to the kitchen table, my legs and lungs both burning with a white-hot pain. I was shaken, but I was all right. I threw on a shirt, almost completely forgetting about the one I left behind, and started to boil some water for tea when I knew I could finally relax. And that's when I heard it. 3 knocks on my door, my front door, at 2 in the morning. Law enforcement. That was the first thought I had. They had finally busted me for trespassing all those times, but I figured if I had just calmly explained myself, maybe they'd let me off with a warning. I walked over to my door and grabbed my doorknob, but something stopped me from turning and pulling it open. Instead, I lowered my eye to the circular peephole in the door, figuring I might as well see who it was before I opened. I shakily backed away from the door, with goosebumps immediately re-emerging on my arms and neck, as the familiar sensation of dread radiated throughout my body. I glanced at the door to make sure it was locked, and for good measure, I ran up and threw on the deadbolt when a second series of thumps reverberated throughout my small apartment. My view of the peephole had been completely black, meaning someone had covered it for a reason that God only knew, but it couldn't have been good. I went out to get my jacket and shirt the next day, when the sun was high in the sky, bringing some semblance of warmth and order to the world. The field was full of parents and kids happily playing soccer, but my articles were gone, along with any sign that anyone or anything was even out there the night before. That was 5 days ago, and every night since, the lights in the field have remained on until 2 a.m. without fail. And every single night at the same time, I hear that metallic clanging in the field, whether there be wind or not, followed soon after by that familiar thudding at my door. I suppose going directly to my apartment immediately after was a poor choice, as now whatever's out there in that field knows who I am and where I live. I don't know what to do. I think maybe I should move back in with my parents. I don't know. I need to get away, and I'm terrified. It was this morning that really sent me over the edge. I opened my door at 8 a.m. in order to head to work when I nearly stepped on something. I picked up the ragged piece of cloth apprehensively, thinking it might be the garment of some homeless vagrant when it dawned on me. Although horribly mutilated and torn to shreds, it was still recognizable. I dropped the cloth in horror. It was my jacket. Even now, as I record this, I regret to inform you, I hear it. As a preface, please note that this will probably be very long. I don't care if nobody hears it. Everyone in the world could listen and nothing would change. I just need to voice my concerns for my own sake. Perhaps by recording it and organizing it, I can make sense of things. Several years ago, I was in a brutal car accident. I was parked in front of a train track, waiting for the train to pass by. I was the last person not to make it across the tracks. For visualization, there was a solid stream of cars on either side. If I had tried to sneak across, I would have rear-ended the person in front of me before successfully clearing them. I could hear the train approaching, and the black and yellow bars lowered in front of me. I'm fascinated by trains, so I was delighted to be so close, finally getting a front row seat. The train was about a quarter mile from the crossing when the driver behind me accelerated and nudged me forward a few feet. The bars bent and eventually snapped, and I was knocked joltingly onto the tracks. I panicked and threw the car into reverse, trying to back out. The other car apparently had more horsepower, however, and to my horror, my car door aligned perfectly with the cattle guard rail on the front of the train. I scrambled to get out of the car, but forgot about my seatbelt. I nearly strangled myself trying to get free. By the time I unlatched it, it was too late. One fraction of a second and the loudest sound I had ever heard, then blackness and silence. I was certain that I had died. I didn't feel any pain, and certainly if I had survived, I'd be in agony. I tried to open my eyes, but nothing would happen. I tried to make a sound, to wiggle my fingers or do anything, but I couldn't. It wasn't that I was paralyzed. It was more like I didn't have a body to manipulate. I was just a mind submerged in a pool of nothing. The only sentiment I felt was that I had returned to that state after being gone for a long time. Like forgetting how your parents' house smells until you visit home for the holidays. Gradually, I started to have feelings of sensation. Passing waves of warmth and wetness finally allowed me to determine where the edges of my body were. Almost as soon as I became aware of my physical self, it began to ache. It felt as if every inch of me had been pummeled with a baseball bat, the heavy wooden kind. Even opening my eyes was a spectacular ordeal. I was in a hospital, so I had survived after all. People moved around me. Faces that never fully came into focus hovered above my own, and sounds that vaguely resembled speech seemed to reach me through water. It wasn't long before I felt weak again and closed my eyes. This fading in and out of consciousness lasted for what felt like a very long time, maybe months, though the doctors told me it was only a matter of days. After that, I worked on speaking and swallowing food, which seems silly, but it was actually a challenge at the time. Finally, as more and more casts were removed, I was allowed to sit up and turn my head, for which I was incredibly grateful. According to my family and then girlfriend Sarah, all of whom were overjoyed at being able to speak with me, I was asleep for several days on end after the crash. I remember Sarah specifically saying that she missed being able to stare at those beautiful eyes. Time passed at an excruciatingly slow pace until physical therapy finally escalated to the point where I could be pushed around in a wheelchair. The doctors were surprisingly hopeful that I'd be able to walk again, but it was what they called cautious optimism. Nobody wanted to tell me I could be independent again and then have to admit they were wrong later. Obviously, I was very hopeful myself, though even transferring from chair to bed was a painful challenge. It was around this time that I noticed I never dreamed anymore. When I slept, I only felt the same nothingness that I felt immediately after the crash. All the days blended together for a while after that. The next memory I can actually separate from the rest is the first time I tried walking on my own. There were staff members holding onto my arms and waist just in case I fell, and with their help, I made it all the way across the room on my first try. The doctors said they had never seen such a rapid recovery. I was giddy. Obviously, I wasn't out of the woods yet, but soon I was allowed to live at home again with frequent physical therapy sessions, and some weeks after that, I returned to work. Life was almost normal for a while, except for a very slight limp in my left leg, the side that the train hit me on. I was feeling pretty normal. It was only after about a month of living in my house that weird things started to happen. The first thing I noticed was that I felt an occasional stinging on my right forearm, like a thin needle was puncturing my skin. It was a tiny prick, maybe twice a day at most. I figured it was just nerve trauma or something and blocked it from my mind. Feigning ignorance was harder to do when I started hearing things, though. While I was reading in bed one night, I thought I heard Sarah crying. I strained my ears to make sure, and I definitely heard her sobs, but very distantly, like I was submerged in a pool. I made my way downstairs quickly, concerned that she had hurt herself or something, but she was just washing dishes in the kitchen. Are you okay? I asked cautiously.
Yeah, why?
She said nonchalantly. No reason. I dismissed these oddities as best I could. After all, how could anyone expect to recover from being hit by a goddamn train without some lingering effects? Every so often, mostly when I was trying to fall asleep or sitting in a silent room, I would hear occasional sounds that I couldn't connect at first. Gradually, I determined that they were hospital sounds, stretchers being rolled across tile floors, beeping from machines, rapid chatter between nurses and doctors. Although I figured anyone who had suffered as much trauma as I had would experience some degree of whatever I was experiencing, I decided to bring it up with my doctor. He told me it was perfectly normal for someone in my circumstances, and he could prescribe me sleep aid if I felt it was necessary. I told him it wasn't a big deal, I was just satisfied that a doctor could explain my symptoms. The odd glimpses of what seemed to be my past only increased in frequency. When I slept, I finally dreamed again, but it was always the same thing. If I saw anything at all, it was a hospital room, and sometimes I was alone with the machines. There was one night in particular in which the dream was more vivid and gripping than usual. My eyes opened widely to see Sarah asleep on the chair beside my hospital bed. Sarah? I croaked. She jerked awake.
Henry!
She scrambled to my side, clutching my hand. At this point, it occurred to me that I was dreaming. I stared right into Sarah's eyes. I'm asleep right now. She seemed concerned.
No, Henry, you're finally awake. I'm right here. It's been so long.
Of course you would say that. You're part of my dream. I smiled, amused. I'll probably wake up any second. As I spoke, the familiar soreness caught up to me all at once. It practically knocked the wind out of my lungs.
Henry, no.
Her distress was now evident.
I don't know what you're talking about. Stay with me, Henry. Stay awake. Look at me.
I shook my head defiantly and closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was back in my own bed. It was about 3 a.m. I sat awake, pondering what I had just seen. I thought I heard Sarah crying again, even though I could see her sleeping beside me. When Sarah finally woke up, she rolled over and laid an arm across my chest.
Good morning, big guy.
She smiled groggily. If I was asleep right now, would you tell me? I asked.
What?
She chuckled.
That's kind of heavy stuff to drop on a sleepy person.
Just bear with me. If I was asleep right now, dreaming, would you tell me?
Well, I feel pretty real.
She noted, patting the different parts of her body.
Do you think I'm not real?
Of course not, I said. We got ready for our day. I couldn't stop thinking about my dream, though. I noticed that when I tried really hard to space out at work and listen closely enough, I could hear the hospital sounds more clearly. I was naturally concerned about this. That night, I went to bed early, and just as I thought, I was transported immediately to the hospital bed. I felt the thin sheets beneath my fingers. I opened my eyes, and Sarah was reading a book in the same chair as before. I looked at her for a long time, trying to discern if she was real. She certainly seemed real enough. She turned pages with the same flourish that she always had, and chewed on one of the temples of her reading glasses. Eventually, she looked up and met my eyes.
You're awake again!
She gasped.
Victoria! Paul! He's awake!
My parents entered the room moments later, looking excited. I talked with them all for a long time. Of course, my parents too denied the fact that I was asleep. but that topic passed quickly. Instead, we discussed my condition. I had been in a coma for almost 3 months with little response. They had been slowly losing hope for my recovery until my brain showed signs of activity. Since that time, they had been visiting me frequently, hoping that I would wake up. It seemed a pretty convincing story. After many hours of talking, I had to stop. I was legitimately sleepy. Of course, they all understood, and I fell back asleep. Only this time, I didn't wake up in my own bed. I woke up in the same hospital bed a few hours later. I had to think about it for a long time, but eventually concluded that I must have imagined my miraculous recovery and had been in a coma the whole time after all. As you can imagine, it was hard to accept at first. Since then, I've been making a second recovery, which has been slower and less successful than the first. That's why, for a long time, I was mostly convinced that I'm really awake this time. Nobody walks after getting blindsided by a train, at least not without lots of hard work. I've still only left my wheelchair on crutches, and it's been 6 years. It probably sounds like a bittersweet ending, and at one point I agreed. I was prepared to live happily ever after in my wheelchair, and maybe even graduate to crutches someday, except for one thing. When I'm getting ready for bed, after I turn off my laptop and my head hits the pillow, I can still hear them. The faint sounds of a busy hospital. I know that many of you will say, but I'm real, this is real life, of course you're awake. That's what you're supposed to say. Nobody's going to tell me I'm fake, you're dreaming, wake up. I'm still asleep, and I've learned to deal with it. I know that nobody I meet during the day is real, but I'm tired, so I just pretend, and that will have to do. I woke up in a birthing sack, panicked and choking on amniotic fluid. I clawed at the fleshy walls, fighting with all my terrified strength to free myself. With a wet, ripping sound, I was dumped onto the muddy cobblestone of the street below, twisting my ankle as I landed. Cold rain blasted my naked body clean of the sack's liquid. I tried and failed to get to my feet. The street was alien to me, an insane medley of architecture ranging from the modern to the prehistoric. The sky above boiled with storm clouds, illuminating my surroundings with non-stop flashes of lightning. A man walked over to me. His hair was matted with filth and the rain streaked down his mismatched leather clothes. He said nothing, just watched me squirm on the floor. "Please," I gasped, "help me." He answered by slamming a foot down onto my face, breaking my jaw and making my vision reel. He moved onto my limbs, stamping and tugging until he heard the bones snap. Crippled, naked, and screaming, there was nothing I could do to defend myself when he started to eat me alive. My introduction to hell wasn't unusual. Very few people survive their first hour, let alone their first night. When they die, they go through the same thing again, emerging from a new birthing sack in another part of the city. Eventually, they learn to attack the first person they see, and if they're lucky, they'll be able to kill that person. That's the one rule in hell. The strong take from the weak. Get used to the idea, and you might just make it through the afterlife. I'm going to give you a helping hand. Consider this your handbook to hell. A primer on the inferno. Make no mistake, though. I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. When you die, you'll owe me one. Don't worry about trying to find me. I guarantee we'll run into each other eventually. Eternity is a long time. So, it's a matter of when, rather than if. Do as I tell you, and you'll have a better chance than most of avoiding my own nasty introduction to the pit. Welcome to hell. Some people swear they saw a light at the end of the tunnel when they died. To my mind, those people either hallucinated or they're lying. Most of us just wake up in a birthing sack a few minutes after death. The buildings of hell are covered in the things, yellow-brown pimples growing out of the brick. I've already mentioned that the first thing you need to do is claw your way out and get ready to fight. This is where the real bitch of the situation comes into play, since not everybody has the strength to break through their sack's flesh. You get the body you had just before you died, see? So, let's say you were born a cripple, or maybe you died too young or too old. Tough shit. You're going to have a rough eternity drowning in birthing fluid over and over. If you manage to break free of your sack, don't waste time moping around, wondering what happened. Get on your feet and get ready to defend yourself. Chances are good that the first person you see will be hungry. There are no plants or animals in hell, so cannibalism is your only option if you don't fancy starving to death and having to start over. Aim to kill the first person you see. It might take a few tries. Most of Hell's residents have been fighting for survival a lot longer than you. They might have armor made from tanned skin, scavenged metal, and bone. They'll almost certainly have a shiv, club, or axe. All of that will be useful to you if you can take it from them. The next thing to do is to find shelter. It never stops raining in hell, and pneumonia is a shitty way to die. Luckily, you'll have a selection of buildings to choose from. Ever wanted to live in a rundown Victorian manor with half a roof and no furniture? How about an ancient Egyptian mud brick hovel? If people have built it, you can find a crumbling version of it in hell. Pick a building, kill any squatters you find, and move in. The best houses are the ones that come with a supply of scrap metal and timber. Not only are these good for making weapons with, they're also vital for getting drinking water. I learned the hard way that hell's rain is teeming with disease. It has to be boiled before it's safe. So, getting a fire going and something to make a bowl with is a necessity. So, we've killed our first man and found a home. Things are going well. Get that far and you're going to want to hang on to what you have forever. You won't. Something will kill you eventually and you'll have to start over. My record is a year. If you want to beat that, you'll need to understand hell and its denizens. The damned. The people of hell can be grouped into two categories. The first, the fresh meat, are those who just climbed out of a birthing sack. It's kill or be killed when it comes to fresh meat. Always has been. The newly birthed want clothing and tools and will kill to get a hold of them. The second category, the residents, view fresh meat as a quick and easy supply of food, leather, and bone. Residents have an easier time of it for sure, and all of them will fight to retain their resident status for as long as they can. Make no mistake though, residents victimize each other just as much as they prey on fresh meat. If you're a woman, for instance, well, you better get over any hang-ups you have about rape. Women get raped in hell far more than men, it's just a fact. If you're not one of those bodybuilders or warrior women, do the smart thing and prostitute yourself for protection. Self-respect doesn't keep you breathing. Remember how you get the body you had just before you died? Well, that fact forms the core of hell's society. The truth of the matter is that throughout history, it's usually been men who die in battle. That means that in hell, there are a lot of men with young, strong bodies fit for war. Don't like it? Tough. Those are the guys who call the shots. If you can't fight them, you better do as they tell you. If you live long enough and fight well enough, you might get invited into one of the resident tribes. These are groups of people who band together for the sake of safety in numbers. Believe me, being part of a group makes things a lot easier in hell. However, keep in mind that you're only part of the tribe for as long as you're a resident. Get yourself killed, and it's back to being fresh meat. Tribes offer the closest thing to civilized society you'll find in hell. If you're part of a tribe, you have people on your side who probably won't kill you unless shit gets rough. Doesn't sound like much, but that's about as good as it gets. My own survival record was thanks to getting into a tribe. Life was good for a while there. We had about 50 soldiers and plenty of girls to fuck. Nobody could touch us, and the men abided by an honor code. So the usual fear of being stabbed in the back by one of your friends wasn't too much of an issue. I could have spent my eternity in reasonable comfort, but hell has a way of fucking over good things. Human flesh and boiled rainwater doesn't exactly make for a balanced diet, and sooner or later, even the strongest resident dies of malnutrition. I did well to last a year on it, though the last few months were agony. If I believed in God, I'd swear he designed hell in such a way that nobody stays on top of the food chain for long. The city in the wasteland. Most of the damned live in Dis, the city of hell. That's where all the fresh meat is born, and considering the size of the place, coupled with the short life expectancy, a lot of people will spend eternity without ever setting foot outside of Dis. Take my advice. Do not leave the city. Things are rough on the streets, that's true, but trust me when I say it gets a lot worse if you try to leave. Dis is surrounded by a wasteland called Gehenna. At first glance, it doesn't look like much, just an empty expanse of gray stretching out into infinity. Sometimes the damned lose that fire in the belly, the will to survive, and set off wandering into Gehenna. Most of them never come back. I made the walk myself once, a long time ago. I don't care how hard you think you are, spend enough time in hell and it starts to break you down. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a good person who never deserved this. Nobody can say that and not be a liar. I'm not evil, though. Or rather, I wasn't. Not until I got to hell. You murder, rape, and torture because you know they'd do the same to you. You're murdered, raped, and tortured because they know you'll do the same to them. Give it long enough and you just don't want to face it anymore. That's when you take the walk into Gehenna. The first couple of miles I walked were nothing special. The rain stopped after a while, the sludge beneath my feet giving way to gray ash, and I caught my first glimpse of hell's sky beyond the clouds. It was a flat gray with a white sun, completely devoid of beauty or warmth. I trudged on. While walking through Gehenna, I lost any urge to eat, drink, or sleep. My body started to waste away, but I didn't care. Even when my skin started to peel away and my bones were exposed, I didn't care. The further I walked, the hollower I became in mind, body, and soul. I don't know what would have happened if I kept going. Frankly, I don't want to know. Some part of me still wanted to live, so I turned back. I'd walked for days, maybe weeks, yet when I turned around, Dis was only a few steps away. I stepped back into the city and my body finally fell apart. When I emerged from my birthing sac, I swore never to step foot into Gehenna again. Escaping from hell. There are ways to leave hell. That should be obvious, otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you, would I? Sometimes the living get it into their heads that they want to talk with the dead. They get their crystals, incense, and spirit boards in hopes of reaching their loved ones. Most do nothing more than trick themselves into thinking they've made contact. They smile or cry, convinced their beloved granny is playing the harp on a cloud somewhere before getting on with their lives. A few have the skill to actually reach us, though. They can open a gate between hell and the world of the living that we perceive as a pillar of fire, stretching down from the clouds. As soon as one of those pillars shows up, the damned scramble to be the first to get to it. You haven't seen the true nature of man until you've watched thousands of the damned swarming over each other, kicking, biting, clawing to be the one who escapes. Contacting the dead always results in a bloodbath. Even the most civilized tribes fall apart the instant it becomes clear that only one of them can leave. I've left hell twice now. Left my body behind and ridden that pillar of fire up into the clouds. Some people believe that you can be possessed by demons. Let me tell you something, demons aren't real. What the living see as demonic possession is just one of the damned testing out their new body. Let's face it, if you fought your way through hell to get back to the world of the living, you're not going to be on your best behavior for long. Sooner or later, we take things too far, our host dies or their family caves and recruit an exorcist. Then we're fresh out of the birthing sack and onto the streets again. By now, you should have a good idea of what you can expect from hell. You know to kill the first person you see when you fight your way out of a birthing sack. You know to find clothing, food, and shelter. You know that no matter what you do, how well you do, someday it's back to being fresh meat. Dis is the biggest city you can imagine. Tribes fight and die for territory, and taking a wrong turn is a fucking death sentence. You'll get a feel for where you should and shouldn't go eventually. Develop the kind of street smarts you need to stay a resident for more than a day. Even so, there are places in Dis that you should know about. Let's do a little sightseeing tour of hell. Maybe the advanced warning will do you some good. Skin Street. Allow me to tell you about the first time I saw Skin Street. I dropped out of my birthing sack onto the road, stood straight back up, and got myself ready to fight. Nobody was there. Not a single person was out on the street that stretched for miles in either direction. I relaxed a little and took a look around. Most of the streets in Dis are a labyrinthian network of buildings. You spend most of your stay in hell paranoid that just around the next corner there's somebody ready to beat you down. Skin Street isn't like that. It's a single straight line with only the rain and the darkness to hamper visibility. I felt more vulnerable there than I felt in any other part of Dis. You ever walked into a wide, empty space and suddenly felt exposed? Yeah, imagine also being naked, unarmed, and in hell. Still, I knew what I was supposed to do. The first step was to find some clothing. That's where I learned how Skin Street got its name. Every building, every busted streetlight and gas lamp was decorated with flayed skin. I'd been in hell long enough by that point to not be freaked out, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me. In a fucked up kind of way, it reminded me of Christmas, you know? People hanging wreaths and lights from their houses, that sort of thing. I remembered the time I'd spent with my family, with my kids on Christmas morning. Feelings like that get you killed. I pushed them back down and pulled some scraps from the nearest building. If somebody was going to leave clothing material lying about, I may as well take it, right? I didn't know it at the time, but every step I took on Skin Street was being watched. When the attack came, I didn't even get a glimpse of the guy. Whoever hit me went for my eyes the second I hit the floor, stuck his fingers right into my sockets. I was blind and crying like a baby when he started to peel away my skin. Here's the thing, some people are fucked up even by hell's standards. The loners, serial killers, stalkers, and psychos all make their way to Skin Street in the end. Most of the damned use the whole body of a kill, but the Skin Street people like to take trophies. They leave their ornaments out as bait for the ignorant, skulking in the shadows and waiting for the best moment to ambush. If you find yourself on Skin Street, you're going to have to think fast. Forget clothing, just grab a rock, a piece of wood, or anything else you can use as a weapon. Stay out of the shadows, keep checking behind you, and get out of there as quickly as you can. Perdition Farms. You're going to be chased in hell, that's unavoidable. At some point, you'll stumble into somebody bigger than you, or you'll find yourself outnumbered. Forget about a fair fight. If somebody can take you down without you fighting back, you bet that's what they'll do. It's easy to lose focus when you're running for your life. You can forget to pay attention to your surroundings. That, my friend, is a big mistake. The outskirts of Perdition Farms are littered with billboards. They promise free food and safety to anybody fucking stupid enough to believe them. The tribes that fight over that particular territory like to herd people off the streets and into the industrial complex they call home. The good news is that those tribes won't kill you. The bad news is that they're big fans of taking people alive. They've got a project, you see. Been working on it for as long as I can remember. I couldn't tell you who originally decided that hell should have organized food production, only that the idea stuck and that over the years, countless tribes have taken it upon themselves to try to make that dream a reality. Get yourself captured by them and you can look forward to a bit of slave labor. For the most part, the Perdition Farms tribes try to make use of the birthing pods as a source of food. They force their slaves to harvest them from the walls, grind them up in industrial vats, mix them with blood, body parts, rainwater, and anything else that could conceivably make a broth. The life of a slave is short, brutal, and disgusting, particularly when those slaves are then used as guinea pigs for the latest concoction. You see, amniotic fluid can be drunk if you're desperate, though drinking too much is guaranteed to make you empty your stomach from every available orifice. The flesh of the sacs is a different matter, though. I couldn't tell you exactly what the birthing sacs are. Some people say they're actual flesh, while others swear they're more like a fungus. What I do know is that they repair themselves over time. Eat some of their flesh, and over the next few days, you'll grow a new birthing sac inside you. It's a small mercy that you won't live long enough to see it break through your skin. You'll be dead shortly after your stomach bursts. If you're lucky, your days as a slave will end when the tribe decides they want some real meat. They're not stupid enough to test their broth themselves, not when there's no shortage of slaves in hell. Look, I can't force you to stay out of Perdition Farms. I can only offer advice. In my opinion, if you think you're being herded there, it's better to take whatever's to hand and cut your own throat. I'd take fresh meat status 100 times before spending another day on the farms. The boneyard. So, maybe you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'm the kind of nutjob who'd join a cult. Is there anything in hell for me? If that sounds like you, the boneyard has you covered. You see, there's a certain kind of religious fanatic who really does belong in hell. I'm not talking about the old dears who bake cakes to raise money for the new church roof here. I'm talking about the guys who went to war because God commanded it, who burned women for supposedly consorting with demons, and who saw nothing wrong with fucking the odd kid. When those people get to hell, they're too thick-headed to make sense of what happened. Why face reality when you can just pretend it's all just a test of faith? They find like-minded folk in the boneyard. I'm told that at one time, the boneyard was a cathedral surrounded by a cemetery that stretched from horizon to horizon. Maybe that's true, I don't know. These days, it's a shanty town of temples and churches built from materials scavenged from the streets. Everywhere you look, you'll find wild-eyed zealots preaching their own twisted version of redemption and gangs of masked men on the prowl for fresh converts. Mortification of the flesh is the main pastime in the boneyard. If you listen to the cacophony of sermons, you'll be informed of how the flesh is wicked and must be purged of sin, how lucky we are to be given such a holy duty, how fortunate to be given the opportunity to redeem ourselves before God. The people of the boneyard have had a long time and plenty of fucking practice when it comes to mastering torture and degradation. I'm not a good person. I've killed, raped, and cannibalized, but I can honestly tell you I'd never be able to dream up some of the shit that goes on in the boneyard. I wandered in there by accident once, and I've never been able to get what I saw out of my brain. I watched a woman, naked and bound, forced onto her knees and violated by iron rods. A preacher sewed his own eyes and lips shut in front of a crowd before sawing off his manhood with a piece of slate. A boy, maybe 14, was publicly crucified. A girl was drowned in shit. An older man had sharpened flint pushed under his fingernails. I could list off 100 other atrocities done in the name of redemption. Stay away from the boneyard. The people there decided that hell just isn't hellish enough for their liking. Forget about redemption. Forget about God. The only way out of hell is by riding a pillar of fire and taking over a living body. Focus on that if you want to escape. The damned can't offer you salvation. The damned only offer pain. I have to leave you soon. If I'm going to make the most of life on Earth, I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip town. While I've had plenty to keep myself entertained, this body just isn't suitable for a run-in with the police. It's only a matter of time until some nosy neighbor thinks to pick up the phone. With the humidity over the last few days, my roommate is already pretty ripe. Here's something you have to understand. Hell is a big place. I've given you fair warning about a few of the locations I myself have run into, and that will have to do. Even if I wrote a library's worth of novels solely dedicated to mapping out the distinct locations within Dis, I couldn't tell you everything about the city. What I can do is give you a bit of information about some of the damned. The Slaughter Man. Take a moment to think about all the celebrities you know. How many of them do you reckon would do well in dis? Not many, I'll wager. Perhaps none. Fame and fortune on Earth doesn't count for shit when you're dead. Very few people are strong enough, mean enough, and downright psychotic enough to earn a reputation in hell. Those few who have what it takes are people you never want to meet. The Slaughterman is one of hell's legends. A huge, bearded man with filed teeth, bloodshot eyes, and foam on his lips. Rumor has it that the day he first emerged from a birthing sack, he was unlucky enough to land at the feet of a slaver tribe. Well, those tribesmen chuckled to themselves and readied their clubs and whips, only too happy to take some fresh meat captive. Outnumbered 12 to 1, naked, unarmed, and brand new to hell, most people wouldn't stand a chance. If you believe the stories, the Slaughterman shrugged off the clubs battering against him and whips cutting into his flesh as though they were insect bites. He picked up the first slaver, put his hands into the man's mouth, and pulled his jaw right off his skull. He moved on to another and then another, tearing them apart with his bare hands until the survivors turned and fled. Nobody knows for sure who he was in life. I've heard theories, though, the most popular one being that he was the berserker of Stamford Bridge, supposedly a single Viking who held up the English army single-handedly. It didn't matter that he could never win, that he was outnumbered, that his enemies had better weapons and armor. He stood on that bridge and fought. By the time he was brought down, he'd killed no less than 40 men. I don't know how true any of this is. I've never seen the Slaughterman for myself, and I don't fucking want to. What I can tell you for sure is that people don't become legendary in hell without good reason. I'd guess that the only one who knows the truth is the Slaughterman himself, and he isn't saying anything. Since the day he arrived in hell, he's only spoken once. The fleeing slavers heard it as the Slaughterman tore their tribe apart. Naked, bloody, and surrounded by corpses, the Slaughterman looked up to the storm-racked sky and bellowed a single word: Valhalla. Hellhounds. How about a little story? I wasn't new to hell. I'd made myself some clothes and a wooden club, found shelter, and had a big slab of meat roasting over a campfire. The only thing I didn't have was a tribe. The area I'd been birthed in seemed slummy even for dis, all half-collapsed hovels and mud huts. Iron was scarce, barely enough to make myself a water bowl. All in all, not a good spot for a tribe. My plan was simple enough. I'd have a decent meal, carve myself a shiv or two in case I lost my club, then find somewhere more or less dry to sleep. After that, I'd set off to look for a tribe. Even the mildest tribal initiations result in a few scars and a broken nose, so I wanted to be as well rested as I could be. Sleep in hell is both vital and dangerous. There's a knack for finding somewhere that's simultaneously sheltered, hidden, and with access to an escape route. Even then, you never get more than a few hours at a time. In hell, the slightest suspicious noise should scare the shit out of you. A low, throaty growl definitely counts as a suspicious noise. I leapt out of my impromptu nest of skins and wood, raised my club, and returned the growl with one of my own. A woman had crept into my building and was staring at me with dilated pupils. She looked to be in a bad way, skinny, naked, and covered in weeping sores. Her lips peeled back to reveal broken and jagged teeth. It took me all of a second to size her up. She'd been living rough for days or weeks, judging from her protruding ribs and bloating stomach. She was well on her way to dying of starvation, so she was weak, hungry, and didn't even have a weapon. "I've already eaten," I said, relaxing a little and giving my club a few practice swings. "No sense in letting you go to waste, though." I took a step toward her and she bolted, just turned right around and scampered away in a strange animal gait. I took off after her, certain that I could outpace her. Even if there wasn't much meat on her, bones can still be useful. I chased her through a few streets, struggling to keep my footing on the muddy ground. When I finally got close enough to swing my club, she stopped dead. The suddenness of it caught me off guard, and I tripped over her, losing my club as I fell. She howled in triumph, a sound that was echoed by a dozen other throats. That day, I learned two things about the hellhounds: the people who lose their minds and become little more than beasts after enduring centuries in hell. Firstly, they have the necessary animal cunning to hunt as a pack. Secondly, human teeth and fingernails are perfectly capable of ripping flesh from the bone. The surgeons. Modern doctors rarely thrive in hell. Academia and reliance on technology don't leave you in the best state to endure the endless violence and brutality. There are exceptions, though. The people who learn to sew their friends back together amid the machine gun fire of the Somme. Shamans, witch doctors, and holy men who endured famine and warfare. Survivalists who knew how to cauterize their own wounds in the middle of a forest. Those are some of the people who might just be strong enough to ply their trade to the damned. After all, working knowledge of basic medicine is just one of those things that's beyond a lot of the meatheads roaming dis. Most of hell's surgeons find a tribe as soon as they're able. Their tools might be crude, but they soon learn to make do. Flint, slate, and shards of glass serve as their scalpels. They make thread from human hair and needles from slivers of iron. Whenever a member of a tribe has an infected sore, a surgeon will be the one to drain the pus. A tribal surgeon could save your life, but they'll do it without anesthetic. Then there are the freelance surgeons, the people who try to go it alone. They make themselves a uniform, the theory being that the damned will recognize them if they all look alike. It doesn't really work, but then you can't expect much logic from people who've lost count of how many times they've died. For one thing, fashions change over time. I'm told that freelancers wore headdresses and bone necklaces at one point. The current trend is to mimic Venetian plague doctors by donning a beaked mask and wearing a long coat of fire-blackened skin. Freelancers are rare. Very rare, in fact. You'll see thousands of damned for every freelance surgeon you come across. When you do come across one, be fucking careful. Firstly, surgeons don't get a free pass in hell. The damned are more likely to attack a freelancer than they are to barter their tools, clothes, or slaves in exchange for his services. You can't be certain if the man in the bird mask and black coat is really a surgeon or somebody who murdered a surgeon and took his clothes. Perhaps they made the outfit themselves in order to draw the weak and the wounded close. Advertising doesn't always work as intended in dis. If the freelancer turns out to be genuine, that doesn't give you an excuse to drop your guard. Freelance surgeons aren't usually the most stable people. Put another way, freelancers are usually sadistic fucking psychopaths. Sure, they might stitch you back together and send you on your way. They might also decide it would be more interesting if they stitched you to somebody else. They might think paying an arm and a leg for their services should be taken literally. They might turn out to be some wannabe serial killer who's yet to find their way to Skin Street. For each freelancer trying to do a tough job in a tougher place, there are a dozen or so mangalas who want to try out their toys on somebody too injured to fight back. Stick with your tribe surgeon if you're lucky enough to have one. Failing that, learn to patch up your own wounds. Trust me, if you're able to read, you've already got the intellectual advantage over a lot of Hell's residents. Freelancers aren't worth the risk. Cambions. I'll be honest with you here, I don't know if cambions actually exist. What I'm going to tell you is something that somebody else told me. It's up to you to decide if it's true or not. Personally, I really fucking hope it isn't. People rape one another in hell. It happens a lot. If you're not strong enough, it'll happen a lot to you. The good news for the ladies out there is that damned men fire blanks. You'll almost never be impregnated. I say almost never because if you believe the stories, there's an incredibly slim chance that a couple of those little swimmers will be awake and looking for an egg. Just to put this into perspective, we're talking conjoined twins levels of unlikeliness here, and that's just conception. The chances of a pregnant woman surviving the full 9 months in hell are probably conjoined triplets level of unlikely. You're talking about a perfect storm of beating the odds here. But this is eternity. A monkey randomly mashing keys on a typewriter will eventually produce the complete works of Shakespeare if it goes at it for eternity. The result of that perfect storm, of those monkeys and their typewriters, is a cambion, a child conceived and born in hell. I'm not saying they exist, okay? I'm saying I've met somebody who swears it's true, and that he's seen a cambion for himself. You see babies in their birthing sacks from time to time. Usually it's just a body. Occasionally you see one drowning. Most of the damned ignore them. They wouldn't survive a day on the streets even if you could afford to devote your full attention to them. Better to leave them be. It's only the really fucked up people who cut through the sacks, and yeah, I'm not going to finish that thought. I'm getting sidetracked. So this cambion, who may or may not have existed, apparently looked like a normal child. It cried, it shit, it sucked its mother's tits just like a regular baby would. The mother was part of a tribe and they'd been able to protect her throughout her pregnancy. Couldn't tell you why. Curiosity, perhaps? When it was born, the whole tribe gathered around to have a look. Among them was the man who told me this story, somebody I'd met years later and eventually killed. This man cut the baby's cord and lifted it up to his face. Every man in the tribe had raped the mother at one point or another and wanted to see if the child looked anything like them. The cambion looked like a normal child in every way but one. Its eyes were dead, lifeless like a doll's. Sure, the kid was alive. It wriggled and cried like a normal baby. Those eyes were wide open, though. Not scrunched closed like a newborn's eyes should be. Wide open, empty doll's eyes. If that story is true, I don't blame the tribe for killing the child. Something like that shouldn't exist. Right, I'm done. I have to go. This is the point where people like to have things nicely tied up. A few dragons slain, a few maidens saved. At the very least, you could expect some kind of moral lesson to think over. I think that in this case, that sort of thing is missing the point. There are no dragons to slay, no morals to learn. We do not live happily ever after. There's no grand revelation, no clever twist, no purpose, no redemption, no hope. There's only eternity among our own kind. I died for the first time on the 18th of August, 2006. It wasn't a particularly pleasant death, nor was it one that I expected. It was simply the random act of violence that destroyed my life, and it came out of nowhere. We were just relaxing at the pub, enjoying a few drinks after a busy day at work. It was my turn to buy a round of drinks, so I was trying to get the attention of the bartender. I felt someone punch me in the side. At first, I thought someone had just hit me, but then I felt the warmth and the rapid stream of blood pouring down my shirt. I realized then and there that I'd actually gotten stabbed. As far as I can remember, it wasn't even that painful. Still, my legs gave out under me and I collapsed to the floor. Even then, I worried about ruining my expensive suit, ignoring the fact that I might be dying. Oncoming death is funny like that. Everyone thinks they're the exception, that they'll get out from whatever horrible situation the universe has thrust upon them. At least, that's what I thought, as the life drained from my body. The world around me just faded to black, and before I knew it, I had just died. Then there was the void. At first, it was little more than darkness, only broken by weird shapes and colors in the distance. As I regained a sense of my surroundings, I was dragged toward a new world, one without pain, suffering, nor death. All there was were people on a journey to different destinations. Whether they had all died like myself, or if they weren't born yet, I didn't know. All I knew was that I wasn't afraid anymore. The worries, the anxiety, and all my fears had been left behind. A light appeared in the distance, endlessly far away. I knew that would be my final destination, my final purpose in the brief life I've led. Unfortunately, I never managed to get that far. I was jolted awake in my own bed, soaking wet from sweat and shaking like a maniac. My hand reflexively clutched my side to cover up the wound I'd sustained, but it wasn't there anymore. In fact, I didn't have a single scratch on me. Had it all been a dream? My phone lit up on the bedside table. I picked it up to find dozens of text messages and missed calls.
Hey man, we're at the pub. You coming or what?
The first message read, sent at 9:43 p.m.
Hey Rick, where the hell are you?
The second message said, sent at 10:23 p.m. Then there were a couple of phone calls and another message.
I guess you fell asleep, or maybe you're getting lucky. Whatever, I'll buy another shot in your honor. Happy birthday, Rick.
Then I had over 20 phone calls and a singular message that sent shivers down my spine.
For fuck's sake, pick up the damn phone. Something happened to Danny.
I immediately called back. My fingers were trembling from both anticipation and from the memory of what had happened only a night ago. Even if my death had been little more than a nightmare, I knew for sure I'd met up with my friends at the pub. The phone rang 3 times, then Jake picked up.
Rick, is that you? Where the hell are you?
Jake asked in a panicked, tired voice. I don't know what happened. I guess I fell asleep? I half asked, half stated.
Danny got stabbed last night,
Jake said without listening to my explanation. Stabbed? How?
I don't know. Some nutjob just walked up to him and stabbed him in the side.
I almost dropped my phone in shock. Danny had been attacked just like myself, in the exact same place. 1,000 thoughts rushed through my mind, but worry quickly became my main concern. Is he all right?
He's still in surgery. They're only letting his wife know about... Oh, wait, here she comes.
Jake put his phone down, but I could still hear the muffled sound of their discussion. Danny's wife seemed upset, but I couldn't make out the words. Jake? I asked.
He's dead. Danny's dead.
The next few moments turned into a blurry haze of information. We'd all known Danny since we were kids, and now he was just gone. The murderer never even made it out from the pub. Apparently he got shot by one of the patrons as he tried to attack another guest. Still, I just couldn't shake the feeling that I was supposed to die that night. Regardless of what happened, time marched on without answers. Some of our coworkers quit after Danny's death, trying to hopelessly move on. I didn't blame them. I also needed some distance. I never even told them what I'd experienced that night. It wouldn't have helped them anyway. A year passed and I hardly spoke to any of my friends. I started to get some semblance of normalcy in the wake of Danny's death, but that would all come to an end on the 18th of August, 2007. By the time day had given way to night, I'd almost finished the bottle. Even as a rather large guy, the alcohol had hit me hard. At around 9 o'clock, I just passed out in bed, awaiting a horrible hangover in the morning. I only awoke around midnight when I heard the front door forcefully break open, followed by footsteps and whispers. I tried to get up, still drowsy from alcohol. As I took one step out from my bed, I slipped and came tumbling down to the floor. I produced a massive crash, loud enough to alert whichever intruders had broken in. I thought you said no one would be home. I stated angrily. What did you deal with it? The footsteps moved quickly in my direction. I tried to lock the door, but they were too fast, kicking it open and knocking me back to the ground. A masked man entered my room, holding onto a gun. He only spoke a single sentence to me before pointing the weapon at me and pulling the trigger. You should have stayed quiet. Unfortunately, the man had a horrible shot. He aimed at my head, but it hit me in the throat instead. There I lay, drowning in my own blood as I desperately gasped for air. I couldn't crawl away, and I couldn't call for help. I died on my bedroom floor, on my own birthday, just as I had a year earlier. Once life finally drained from my body, and the god-awful pain ceased, I was back in the world beyond. I walked through the same colorful dimension that lay just on the edge of life. I admired the shapes and colors as they passed. In the distance, I saw a tree with branches stretching endlessly far from its trunk. from each branch ended a person, real but not existing in our world. I wanted to visit them, but that wasn't my destination. Because just like before, I would wake up in my own bed, unharmed by the events from the previous night. My phone buzzed, and I was filled with an unfathomable dread. I still couldn't quite believe it. I started to understand that someone would take my place in death. Hello?
Rick, it's Dad. Your mother. She passed away last night.
A lump formed in my throat. I knew what was coming next, but I had to ask. How? What happened?
The police say it was a burglary gone wrong. I don't know. I was working late. I should have been there.
The discussion trailed off from there. My dad was distraught and could barely form coherent sentences. He blamed himself for not being there, but I knew the truth. It was my fault. During the next 2 months, I couldn't blame him. He just lost the love of his life. I moved in with him just to help him pick up the pieces. He put on a strong face, trying his best to keep the ship afloat, but I could tell how close he was to just breaking down.
If only I'd been there.
It wasn't your fault, Dad. Had you been there, you might be gone too.
You don't know that.
But I did know. Because the burglars weren't ever supposed to visit my parents' house. They were supposed to kill me. I had to come clean. I had to let him know the truth, but how could I? Half a year passed, and the secret ate at me. After everything that had happened, I still didn't know how to explain it. So I decided it was time to share my curse. Dad, can we talk?
Yeah, what's going on?
He asked with a worried expression on his face. He knew me well, and he could tell a heavy burden was weighing me down. I started by telling him about my first death, down to the smallest detail. Of course, it matched everything that the people had witnessed in the pub, even the location of the stabbing. I told him Danny had taken my place in death and that I felt guilty. Naturally, he was skeptical at first, but then I told him about my mother. I didn't spare him any details. I told him where I'd gotten shot, that the door had been broken down, and there were 2 robbers. Every detail matched perfectly down to the letter. I'm so sorry, Dad. It was my fault. I killed her. I just sat there in silence, processing what I just told him.
It wasn't your fault.
I was confused. There wasn't a single ounce of anger in his words, only overwhelming empathy. How can you say that? She didn't have to die. He mulled over his next words carefully before speaking.
You didn't do anything wrong, Rick. You just went about your life, and these things happened to you. I don't know why you've been brought back, or even how, but you're not to blame for what is done to you.
So, you believe me? I asked. He nodded and embraced me in a hug. Suddenly, I wasn't alone in the world anymore. Someone knew what was happening to me. What if it happens again?
Then we'll get through it together.
He stood by these words, even as my next birthday rolled around. That day was my turn. I slipped in the shower and broke my neck. The last thought that went through my mind as I left the world for the 3rd time was, how cliché. Once again, I awoke in my bed. I called out for my dad, making sure he was still alive, horrified that he might have taken my place. I couldn't even breathe until he came rushing to my side, asking what had happened. I broke my neck, but I'm fine, I think. It took a while before I figured out who had taken my place that time. But once I heard that my boss had died, something broke inside of me. He was the kindest man I'd ever met. And just like myself, he'd slipped and broken his neck. That was the final straw. It wasn't a coincidence I could brush off, nor a premonition. I decided then and there that I couldn't live with the responsibility. I had to put a stop to it, even if it meant giving up my own life. I figured that if I took control over my own fate and killed myself outside my own birthday, maybe I could prevent more people from dying. First, I left behind a long letter to my father, explaining why I had chosen to leave. I couldn't face him in person. I knew he'd just try to take me out of it, but it was something I had to do. I couldn't allow any more people to die on my behalf. Alas, fate is a fickle bitch. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't end my own life. I tried hanging, but the rope broke. Then I tried to shoot myself, but it didn't. When that failed, I tried to drive my car into a tree, but somehow I survived that as well. Any attempt was met with failure. All I could do was wait for my next birthday and let someone die in my place. No matter how many times I tried, I couldn't die. I was a slave to destiny, and it was destroying me. In 2009, I was hit by a drunk driver, and my girlfriend took my place. In 2010, I drowned, and my kind neighbor had to go through that death. In 2011, I died from a brain aneurysm, which ended up killing me out. And so on. Each year, the person who would take my place. I kept trying to find a way out, but fate wouldn't have it. Years went by, and on the 18th of August 2019, I would die for the 14th time. I'd already fallen sick a week earlier, much to the doctor's confusion. According to each and every laboratory value, I was fine, yet I kept getting sicker. My father and I both knew my time was near, but I also knew I'd be forcefully brought back. Then, at midnight on my birthday, my heart just gave out. I was jolted awake in my own bed, and the sickness was little more than a distant memory. "Dad?" I called out. No response. I got out of bed and called his name again. I was met with silence. I didn't have to call a third. I already knew what had happened. I carefully walked into his room, terrified at what I knew would come. He was dead, just gone from a heart attack. He'd taken my place, and I could do nothing to save him. The funeral came and went in a blur. The only noticeable thing was the missing seats from the people who had passed before him. Some of them had lived their own lives and died as nature intended, but a number of them were supposed to live on. Instead, they'd just taken my place in death. I inherited a number of things from my father. Among them, I found a letter addressed to me. It looked rather worn, so I could tell he'd written it a long time ago.
Dear Richard, today is your birthday, and it has officially been a year since your mother passed. While I miss her greatly, I'm thankful to still have you. I know that if she was given the choice, she would want you to live. I feel the same way. We both know that I might one day take your place in death. Never doubt that I would happily give my life if it means that you may live. You didn't choose this curse, so never blame yourself. Just do what every person is supposed to. Appreciate the people around you, because you never know what day might be their last. I love you, Dad.
Since I read that letter, I've been looking for a way out. My father might want to stay behind, but how can I live on, knowing that I'm taking someone's place? I've long since left home, living by myself in a cabin somewhere away from people. Hopefully, if I have no one left that cares about me, people will stop dying. At least I can figure out not only how to die, but how to actually stay alive. I'm sorry.
C4 is planted at bomb site Bravo. Bomb has been planted. Incendiary. Throwing smoke. Terrorists win. C4 is live at bomb site Alpha. Bomb has been planted.
I was 8 years old and in the hospital. My mother was caressing my shoulder, familiar worry etched into her face. The white room we were in smelled like flowers dipped in rubbing alcohol. Next to her was the doctor, hunched toward me and taking his sweet time suturing the final stitches in my fingertip. the one I feel the can with. It hurt. Even with the shots they gave me, it still hurt. But behind the mild tugs and sharp jolts of pain, my mind noticed something moving in the room. A small, grainy shape floating by the doctor's head. An orb, like a snow globe. Aimlessly, it wafted around the room, a helpless bubble caught in an unseen current. The inside of it fluttered with swarming specks of light that made me think of fireflies. All at once, the specks condensed in the orb's center, throbbing brightly with the pulse of light, and then continuing to swarm in their different directions. They did this at a steady pace, just like the pulse in my finger. Mom? I finally asked, do you see the flame? She and the doctor exchanged puzzled looks. That was the first time I saw them. The second time was at my friend's house back in 7th grade. It was a school night, and we'd spent the evening shifting between scary movies and reaction videos. What had started for me as a slight ache in my temple soon escalated into a pain. My head was absolutely killing me. I dreaded the walk back home, and my friend's dad let me sleep on his couch until the painkillers sedated me. In the quiet darkness of the stairway, miserable in my peripheral vision, this hazy, light-filled body drifted by the stairs. The same crystal steps, the whispering, whisking, clueless movements. But one thing was different. This time, I could smell the smell of an ashtray. When the painkillers kicked in, both the orb and the smell were gone. It wouldn't be until later that same month that I found out my friend had lost her mother to lung cancer caused by her favorite cigarettes. There was an eerie comfort in realizing you aren't crazy, that the things you'd noticed all your life weren't just figments being upchucked out of the imagination. Pain. That's the trigger point. It's the only way I can see the spirits, or entities, or whatever you'd like to call them. I've always considered that a blessing. Without my endorphins working as an off switch, I'd see them everywhere, coasting all over the place, arranging each other like jellyfish corpses. I've tried touching them, even going as far as to try to catch one in a jar. No dice. They're all incorporeal. Not all of them have their own distinct smells. Don't ask me what factors into that. Sometimes, if I'm close enough to one, I can make out something reflected off its transparent surface. A faint glimpse of lips, hair, maybe an eye staring back at me. I don't consider myself a medium or anything highbrow like that, nor do I talk to anyone about these sorts of things. Attention isn't something I seek. To be honest, I'm just someone used to being out there. I was born with cat eye syndrome in my left pupil, an abnormality that elongates its shape. Contrary to the name, my pupil looks more like a glob of ink sliding down my iris than the eye of my gray cat. Because it can't dilate on its own, I'm also extra sensitive to bright things. For the most part, I've gotten used to the double take. Look one at a time, then snap away approach. School thickened that tolerance. The kids called me Cyclops, and spread rumors that I was infected with some horrific disease. I'm not sure if that's the reason I can see the things I do, but one thing is certain. My left eye can spot them a lot more clearly in the dark. One Thursday evening, in the faint point of sunlight, my uncle contacted my father and asked if I'd like to visit him for a few days. My uncle was looking for some last-minute assistance renovating a new home he was getting ready to move into, and offered me a chance to make some extra money. Considering that he'd cover the flight to Mississippi, I took him up on it. Being a fresh graduate out of high school, I was scrounging up whatever funds I could find for college. The trip from Los Angeles to Delta, Mississippi was over 3 hours, and Uncle Gavin was already there at the pickup spot. I wasn't just there for the job. Getting to see him was worth the flight all on its own. You'd never meet a brighter spirit than his, always smiling and lending a helping hand, despite his own personal trouble. When he wasn't preaching at his local church, he was giving back to the community, some way, some way. catch the southern spirit, a dented sign said, welcoming us to Holmes County. Whatever that was, I hoped it wasn't contagious. We reached where I'd be staying for the next few days, a farmhouse that could easily fit a family of 5. Uncle Davin's backyard opened up to a large field with tall trees lining the borders. In the distance was the decaying corpse of an abandoned barn. The closest neighbors were miles away, between vast cotton fields and cypress swamps. If anyone ever asked my uncle why he chose the backwoods of Mississippi, he'd merely shrug and say,
We were sick of all the noise, I guess.
ironic, considering the obscene number of mockingbirds surrounding his property. He couldn't take 2 steps out of his front door before hearing them whistle at you from the tree line. Even at night, the lonely males sang. I'm sure my uncle did need help with refurbishment, but more than that, he just wanted some company. Aunt Rosie, his wife, had passed away due to heart conditions not long ago. They'd moved there together some time ago, to the land of flat glades and blues music, only for one to be left behind, all alone. I'd met Aunt Rosie a handful of times, and each visit she'd be nothing but kind and generous. It was unfortunate he'd been unable to make it to the funeral due to my father's poor planning and flight tickets and months the date. Despite that, Uncle Davin had no bad feelings towards his brother. By nightfall, I'd finished unpacking in the guest room and waited for the forlorn songs to put me to sleep. The next morning, we got up early, ate breakfast, and made our way to the job. We spent the whole afternoon clearing rooms, tearing out carpets, and sanding down hardwood floors. By the end of the day, we'd managed to finish a few rooms and get started on the bathroom tiles. I was exhausted. On the long stretch of road back to my uncle's house, I gave him a pat on the shoulder.
Thanks for the help, pal. I'm just for coming by and
No problem. I yawned. He averted his gaze back to the road and started to whistle the tune, Home on the Range.
That was a favorite song.
He said,
Same one she'd always sing after church. Of course, the little beat bastards learned it. So I can still hear it in the driveway.
a hard sigh blew out his nose.
It's hard being honest with yourself, isn't it?
What do you mean?
I mean, having to accept that things change, no matter what you could have done. It's good to embrace life, to accept the fact that it's both cruel and beautiful.
I watched his neck slightly turn toward the pale orange tint of the sky.
You thank God you still have eyes that can see the sunset, but it will never look as pretty as it used to.
He then switched on the radio, and we drove the rest of the way in silence. That night, instead of sleeping, I was doodling some sketches on the writing desk in my room. I'm no artist, but it was a nice distraction from Uncle Davin's long, slow snores floating down the hallway. Something then grazed my nose, a lingering fragrance of floral and citrus, perfume. I looked around the room and spotted movement at my door. A small, dancing orb. Its center seemed to wink when it got my attention. The lamp on my desk was slightly, but I wasn't in pain. In fact, I felt fine. An icy worry crept down my neck. Was I in pain somewhere and hadn't even noticed? The orb lazily approached me and then hastened back to the doorway. I'd never seen one move like that before. Curious, I moved toward it and watched it as it made its way toward the stairs and stopped, waiting. It wanted me to follow it. Another realization sparked inside me. This was Aunt Rosie's perfume. I trailed down the steps after the orb and watched as it sank through the door to the backyard. Grabbing my jacket and my shoes, I stepped into the cold of outside. Sharp air brushed my cheeks. Cicadas made song sounds from the underbrush, underscoring the mockingbird's whistles. The orb was in the field, blinking like a distant lantern. When I finally reached it, the thing dropped and sank into a dead patch of grass. Then the bird started to scream. The whiteness swelled out of the ground. It lit the surrounding turf, still inflating like an oversized balloon about to burst. I raised a hand to shield my eyes from the intense glow, It was huge, a large round tumor of vibrating, pulsing light. And inside the white plastered center of its haze were black, twisting shapes, vague, shadowy objects forming like blots of ink on a canvas. What do you see? Rorschach asks. Hands, fingers, all forming out of the white, milky haze, clawing at its insides. Tormented, wailing faces were pushing outward against the orb's stretching yet unyielding inner walls. Their silhouetted mouths stretched open in soundless agony. The brightness shot pain into my left pupil, but I didn't dare look away. I felt dizzy, like I needed to grab onto something, to clasp a little bit of reality back into my hands. But there was nothing. Just me, the field, and the orb full of terrible, writhing things. A playground of pure hysteria. Then, out of the squirming void formed a woman's face. Aunt Rosie's face. Her features as clear as day. Her eyes held the desperate look of someone helpless. Her skin was pasty and loose like melting wax. Her hair was tangled and clumped with dark clots of mud. I watched her colorless lips open and close, speaking, but no words reached me. My legs trembled and I staggered back. I felt like someone on stilts, about to snap their neck along the pavement. I was going to faint. Before the dizziness overtook, I craned my neck toward the house. The lamp in my room was flickering brightly. Then, nothing. I'm not sure how long I was out, but when I came to, the orb and my aunt's face were gone. Needless to say, sleep was a non-existent thing that night. Every so often, I'd once more peer out the window, wondering if I'd see that glow in the field again. When morning finally came, it didn't take long for my uncle to notice how exhausted I was.
You all right, pal?
He asked as I dozed off in the passenger seat. Yeah, I didn't get much sleep. I'm all right. I wasn't, not by a long shot. Part of me wanted to tell him the truth, that hours ago, his deceased wife had somehow made contact with me, that she looked distressed, like she needed help. And what would that do for him? He'd been through enough as it was. No, I needed to ruminate on it some more. Another hard day's work, and we completed a good portion of the house. To celebrate, we went out to eat and watch some late-night stand-up. 2.5 hours after that, I was sitting at the desk, still eyeing the field. I wasn't sure what to expect, or even how to digest the information I had already. Then, sure as hell, just as I started to feel that pinprick of ease, the small orb floated by, its delicate light blinking at me. Perfume wafted in my face. Still, there was no pain. I swallowed hard. Is that you? No response, just more drifting. I tried again. That's you, make a sound. Move to the hallway. Give me a sign or something. As I said that, the lamp on my writing desk flickered. Can you do that again? I asked. The light spasmed once more. I need to know if you need help. As though harnessed to my voice, the lamp started to flash its light again. It stopped, then started again, repeating the same exact pattern twice more. Pulses that were short, long, and distinct. Without thinking, I grabbed a sheet of paper and started to write. It was a jumbled, seemingly random flicker to most, but to me, it was a signal. I should thank my time as a Boy Scout for that. We used to spell out swear words to the neighboring troops with our flashlights. I scribed the sequence the orb was repeating. Help. That was it. We were communicating. You need to tell me more, I said. Why do you need help? The lamp flashed again steadily, adding to the pattern. Help us. I twisted my head toward the orb, which was now circling the room like an intoxicated sprite. She was calling to me, pleading for help, but it was not just Aunt Rosie. There were more of them. There was us. Before I asked them the question, the message shifted. I felt a sharp pang of anxiousness. Why that word? Why that awful word? A cold, jagged word that punched into me like cold metal. My heart lurched painfully as if pumping excess fluid from my chest, trying to save itself from drowning. I didn't want to ask the next question. I didn't want the answer. Who killed him? My husband. No. I crossed the word out, as though that held even an ounce of power. That wasn't possible. My uncle was a saint, the most selfless man I knew. He cared for people. He gave sermons at church. He had never hurt anyone, let alone the love of his life. My brain rejected the notion. It was wrong. It had to be. The light blinked out another sequence, pausing because the bulb was starting to go out. Just as its last speck of life shorted out, I got the final message. Basement. When I checked back on the orb, it was also gone. Fizzled. Gathering my thoughts, I quietly made my way to the basement door. The stairs shuddered under me. It had to have been 4, maybe 5 in the morning. Didn't know and didn't care. Sleep was the last thing on my overloaded brain. The basement was cold and spacious, with concrete walls, gray cabinets, and a workbench against the wall. Beyond that was just a small square window to the backyard. I paced the room, unsure of what I was even looking for. On the right side of the room was a door propped inches open. I pulled it open the rest of the way to reveal a small closet with a chair in the center. The chair had thick leather straps made for wrists and ankles. The legs were firmly nailed into the ground. It looked like something made for a hysterical patient in a psych ward. The wooden arms were perforated with deep grooves where fingernails had scratched into them. Surrounding the chair in the closet was a rough circle of salt, lined with rows of now melted candles. I had to step back and remind myself to breathe. Being strapped down by that small, narrow space gave me a shaking and suffocating feeling. I went back to my bedroom, where sleep would never find its way back to me. Before I knew it, my uncle and I were making the final trip to get the remaining rooms refurbished. Throughout the day, there was an evident awkwardness between us. The chair was a constant overtone in my thoughts. I was thinking of 1,000 ways to bring it up to him. It felt like a dangerous after I was gone. One for over the phone. Even then, during the drive back to his house, I couldn't hold it all in anymore. I had to say something. Uncle Davin? He tilted his neck. I'm sorry to ask this, but it's been eating at me for a while now. How did Aunt Rosie die? Something stirred in her eyes. A subtle fleck of surprise that quickly slunk back to the corner it was hiding in.
Sorry. I wasn't expecting a question like that. She had heart problems. Didn't I tell you and your folks already?
No, not me. I lied. You probably mentioned it to my parents, though.
You're probably right. What has you so curious?
He gave me a quizzical look. Just the chair in your basement, my thoughts pestered. Yes, just the chair with the leather straps and nailed legs. Who was that for? No reason. I shrugged. Just a bad dream I had last night. The conversation dwindled after that and didn't spark again for the rest of the evening. I was sitting at the writing desk, chewing my nails down to ragged stubs. The bulb I had replaced had not yet blinked or flared. My flight was tomorrow, and I couldn't either dreading it or yearning for it. I rang my dad's phone, to no avail, and my mom's was going straight to her voicemail. I just wanted to talk, to hear another voice in my head other than my own. There was a knock at the door. "Hey," I said. My uncle pushed the door open, a glass of dark whiskey in his hand.
Hey,
He sighed.
it's your last night up here. You want to watch a movie with me?
No thanks. I'm pretty tired, actually. His face gave a faint, troubled look.
What's going on between us? I feel like you're upset.
No, I'm not. Sorry. I just have a lot on my mind right now.
You were in the basement, weren't you?
A lump of panic. What? I sighed heavily and stepped toward the bed, practically stumbling into it for a hunched seat. I realized then how drunk he already was.
That's what you asked, huh?
He muttered.
Because you were, worried?
I wasn't sure what to say. This wasn't Uncle Davin sitting across from me, but a carbon copy of him that drank itself silly and hid secrets from people.
I'll share something with you.
He said dryly.
Something I haven't shared with the rest of the family. To be, honest, rather self-conscious about it.
His eyes wilted toward the whiskey between his hands.
I used to be an exorcist. You know what that is, right?
I nodded my head.
Good boy. I figured you would.
He chuckled nervously.
And subjects like that are fairy dust to you, but if you'd see what I have, maybe you'd get it. People harming themselves, screaming at me with voices that didn't belong to them, eyes rolling back in their sockets, foam spewing out of their mouths. People came to me for help. Yeah, they came to me, and I helped them.
He repeated solemnly.
I helped all of them.
What does that have to do with Aunt Rosie? He twirled the glass in his hand, spilling some liquor on the floor.
This house never liked me. From the start, something was wrong with it. Something was here first, in the basement. Rosie found it, and it got to her, made her act strange.
He choked out the end of the sentence, pausing to wipe a tear from his cheek.
She wanted to hurt me. She wanted to hurt herself. I had to do it. And I did. But her heart. I didn't make it. I can't go back down there. I can't. That's why you've been helping me renovate the new house. Because I can't be here anymore. It's too much for me.
The rest of the words drained into incoherent sobs.
I'm sorry, Al. I'm sorry.
I helped him off the bed and led him down the hall to his room. His breath reeked of disgusting alcohol.
Tried.
He mumbled as I got him to bed. The door clicked shut behind me. I couldn't take it anymore. It was too much to break down. My legs brought me to the garage. Enough was enough. My uncertainty, every last bit of it, had graduated into a searing clarity. Cold air couldn't reach me. Mockingbirds were whistling and singing from the tree line. I marched onto the dead patch of grass in the field and started digging. The birds shrilled in a choir of high-pitched whistles.
Shut up!
I barked at them, pushing the round-pointed blade deeper into the earth. Then, I heard the subtle scrape of it hitting something. I dropped to my knees and raked the wet dirt aside. It looked like a wine glass, absolutely caked in red, black substance. Things clattered around inside of it. This was it, the truth. I cracked open the seal and peered within. There were old pennies, a lock of black, brown hair bound with a cord, and a single candle holder. Then, light. A wave of light erupted out of the box. It washed over my wrists, slipping inside my sleeves like burning ice. It crawled up my arms, gushing out of the box like blood from an artery. The light flowed and expanded, converging over me in the roundish shape of a large sphere. My body went numb. The world melted into vague, swirling images. I could still hear the cry of the mockingbirds converge into a piercing, rhythmless pitch, louder and louder. It slid into my ears, blotting out all senses and understanding, drowning me inside out. I couldn't breathe anymore. I couldn't taste the cold air. My feet no longer felt the ground under me. I was falling down a deep, airless shaft. No more light, just an endless, hungry darkness. The muscles in my arm tensed painfully. A voice that wasn't mine screaming. When I came back, I was standing in a dark room. The screaming had stopped. My heart was pounding my ribs like a caged animal. I was sticky with sweat. Whatever I was holding suddenly clouded into the wet with blood. Dread swallowed my thoughts.
My eyes traced the room, my uncle's room, and settled on the bed, where a bundle sat stationary beneath the covers. A body. The sheets were doused in blood and torn greatly with newly opened slits. My trembling hands were coated in it. Help! My ruptured mind managed to pull together. We need to get help. I twisted toward the door and stopped. A slew of blood smeared over the wall in crude, wet letters read. I called the police, but my uncle was long dead before they arrived. I was taken in and arrested, since I was the only one in the house, the only one with the murder weapon. My prints were all over the crime scene. I'll be going to court for manslaughter charges pretty soon. According to my appointed lawyer, our best bet in the system is an insanity plea. Whatever had been inside that box had taken my body for a ride and stabbed Uncle Davin 20 times. I'll never forgive myself for letting that happen. Thank you, it told me. I'm sorry, Uncle Davin. I'm so sorry for what I've done to you and for whatever hell I've released into the world. Forgive me. Please, forgive me.
Bomb has been planted. Grenade!
I'm a student at Bridgewater State in Massachusetts. I share a dorm with my roommate Wallace. We both major in computer science, and that's all we've ever talked about on the rare occasions that we actually speak to one another. We don't have much else in the way of common ground. You see, Wallace is an odd guy. He's very socially awkward and doesn't have many friends, if any at all. I've only ever seen him talking to his professors, and one time the janitor. It's safe to say that Wallace is a recluse. Because of this, I don't know much about him. I would love for the guy to open up more, but I'm not sure how to go about doing that. Besides, I have enough on my plate as it is between exams and the struggles of day-to-day finances. As cliche as it might sound, ramen is a popular meal on campus. Another one of Wallace's quirks is his obsessive-compulsive nature. He conducts himself in a very specific manner and has a daily routine mapped out to a T. It never changes. When he's awake, he brushes his teeth, making sure to gargle on his feet exactly 3 times. He then puts on a striped shirt followed by khaki pants. His wardrobe never changes. He always arrives to class 5 minutes early and turns in his assignments a day before they're due. And this is how it's always been. How do I know all of this? Well, being a socially awkward hermit, Wallace didn't tell me these things. I don't think he's even aware that his routine is a byproduct of OCD. I'm not claiming to know exactly what causes Wallace's actions, but I do minor in psychology. It's just something I've picked up on in the 2 years I've lived together. It's almost impossible not to notice. Knowing Wallace's usual behavioral patterns, I noticed that something wasn't right. He began sleeping in his bed, not brushing his teeth, and not turning in his assignments on time. Eventually, he stopped sleeping in our dorm altogether. After over a day of not seeing him, things started looking grim. Despite not knowing Wallace all that well, I became worried. Depression and suicide rates are at an all-time high for our age group. I didn't want the poor guy to do something stupid. That worry justified me hacking into his laptop to see what he'd been up to. It was the only thing I could think to do. In finding his laptop and turning it on, I felt like a fool. The thing was as clean as a whistle, at least to my eyes. You see, though I pride myself in my tech know-how, Wallace is far more adept in the field. It was safe to say that I wouldn't find a shred of evidence as to where he might be or what he'd been doing. No journal entries, no browsing history, no nothing. Feeling anxious, I thought about any other potential ways to continue my hunt for the truth. That's when something clicked. Like I said before, I sometimes saw Wallace talking to the janitor in the house. He was the only person I had ever seen him speak with at length. It was possible that he knew something about Wallace's state of affairs. Later that night, I exited my door and went into the house, eventually found the janitor. I tried to be gentle when confronting him, as he had his back to me and was known to be hard of hearing. Still, when I tapped him on the shoulder, he jumped.
Holy cheeseballs, you nearly scared me half to death.
Chuck laughed through his bushy, gray mustache.
What can I do for you, son?
I told Chuck about my predicament and how I was concerned for Wallace. Not that I've seen him in a while. Chuck's happy expression transformed into a look of unease and tension. He seemed to know a bit more than I did.
Well, here's the thing. Wallace is a good kid, and we do chat from time to time. I happen to know where he might be, but I wouldn't feel comfortable blurting out the details of his social life to anyone who asks, even if you are his roommate.
Social life? Wallace didn't have a social life. I pressured Chuck into letting me in on the secret. I really laid it on thick, expressing a great deal of concern for Wallace's well-being. Being the nice old janitor that Chuck was, he eventually gave in.
Okay, I understand. Just please don't tell him that I told you, okay?
I nodded, eagerly waiting for him to reveal Wallace's whereabouts.
Wallace has been feeling really down lately. He's got no one to talk to but me. The kid wanted some friends, people that he could hang out with and talk to.
I listened closely to the details I so desperately sought after.
So Wallace went on something he called, what was it? The deep web. And there he found a group of people. They called themselves the Clan of the Red Wolf or something like that. They invited him to one of their meetings. That's where he is right now. He seemed pretty excited when he told me about it. In fact, it's all he's been talking about for the past week.
There. That was it. That was the bit of info I needed. The key to finding Wallace. I thanked Chuck and gave him a goodnight wave as I ran back to the room. From the sounds of it, Wallace had himself involved with a group of people who shared in his interests, and eventually they invited him to hang out in real life. I had their quirky name, the Clan of the Red Wolf, and that's all I needed to find them on the deep web myself. Soon enough, I would be able to find their missing link. It took quite a while, but I finally managed to find a deep web forum pertaining to the so-called clan. It contained nothing but a description and a series of videos. Here's the description as it appeared on the site. Welcome to your new belief system. We are the Clan of the Red Wolf, and we are here to help. There are 7 educational videos on this site, each tailored to a specific belief that we want to share with you. You are asked to watch these programs to understand our doctrine. If you make it to the end, you will be invited into our group. Good luck. The summary was bizarre, but nothing less than what I expected. Scrolling further, I noticed that all the videos were titled similarly. Day 1, Day 2, and so on. Naturally, I watched them. The whole series reminded me of old war propaganda. It was made in the style of a vintage cartoon, starring a wolf as the main focus. Not a normal wolf, but a cartoon caricature version of one. Picture a character similar to Wile E. Coyote. In each video, the wolf learned a new clan value from the campy male narrator. Not unlike old cartoons, the wolf comically goes against the narrator's wishes and suffers the consequences before learning his lesson. Every video ends with the narrator saying, "Join the pack. You never have to feel alone again." I guess that was the selling point for Lonely Wallace. I will share with you a bit of the transcript from each video, along with any points of interest. Video 1. Wildlife. Treat flora and fauna with dignity and respect. They are people too. Trees provide you with the air you breathe, and animals share the earth with you, keeping you from being alone. They deserve more than you ever will. Wolf relieves himself on tree. Tree falls on top of him, crushing his head and revealing his blood and brain matter inside. Video 2. Thicker than blood. Your blood is the most important material in your earthly vessel. The clan requires a sample upon joining our order. This is a requirement from all pledges. Our blood must flow as one for us to work together and save the planet. Wolf enters a room full of cloaked figures, presumably clan members. All members are in line, giving blood samples. The wolf refuses to have his blood drawn and walks away. The cloaked figure sneaks up on him and slices his throat with a dagger. Video focuses on the wolf bleeding out for a few moments before fading to black. Video 3. Obey or suffer. Remember what happened to our friend when he didn't give his blood to the cause? He didn't obey our order's rules, so he had to suffer the consequences. Remember, the clan's laws are important. You must obey or pay. Trust me, it's worth it. Shows the wolf bleeding out again, only now a few cloaked figures are on top of him, stabbing his corpse repeatedly. Video 4. Vow of secrecy. The clan of the Red Wolf is often misunderstood. Because of this, it is important to never tell anyone of our existence, under any circumstances. You may only speak about clan activities with other clan members. If this way, and he will perish. Wolf is shown talking to his wolf pals and showing them his new cloak. A cloaked figure walks into frame with what looks like a semi-automatic weapon and opens fire. The wolf falls to the ground, dead. The cloaked figure gives a thumbs up before the video ends. Video 5. Learn and understand. If you're allowed into our inner sanctum, you will be greeted with knowledge. We abide by the word of the Red Wolf, and you will too. You will be expected to learn and understand his teachings, otherwise you will fail, not only the clan, but the entire world. Wolf is seen in a classroom environment taking a test of some sort. He turns around to the teacher and receives an F. The entire class points and laughs at him, and then pulls out a plethora of medieval weaponry from their robes. They then proceed to close in on the wolf. The wolf swallows the lump in his throat before the video ends. Video 6. Tasks and rituals. As a new recruit, you will be asked to carry out various tasks ranging from the mundane to the fantastic. Most of these missions will involve fetching ingredients for our rituals. As boring as that may sound, it is the most important thing you can ever do for the clan. Rituals are what give the clan power. Without this power, you cannot hope to rid the world that plagues it. Wolf fails to bring ingredients to clan member for the ritual. Jump cut to Wolf being sacrificed on a black altar atop a pentagram. He is beaten, cut open, and eventually torn apart by his fellow clansmen. Video 7. Mortals. When accepted as a full-fledged clan member, you are no longer considered human. You will be one of us. From that point forward, you are discouraged from any and all human interaction, unless it is deemed necessary to the cause. Humans are vile, filthy, disgusting, and dangerous creatures. We seek to exterminate them once and for all. Any human who knows of our existence and isn't deemed worthy enough to join us to be killed. Nature is your only friend. Wolf is walking down a main street-like environment.